This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Isotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. You're hearing my voice right now through the beautiful Roswell Pro Audio Aztec tube microphone, mixed through Isotope, Ozone, RX, and Neutron, all on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. Also, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because it's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
So can you imagine crowd surfing a drum set? And
not exactly, no.
But they do this. So their drummer he is crowd surfing because they're holding up his seat, I believe, his throne, and they're also holding up the drum set. And he's up there hitting it and whatever, and they're spraying lighter fluid and whatever else. They set the top of their van on fire.
Good
which
Lord.
I can only think, how long is that going to last? But they keep doing it. But they're crazy enough, they take the show outside. So like they're playing on stage, their amps are still on stage,
right?
But they'll go outside if their guitar cords and whatever will reach out there, and maybe they'll carry the amps too. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how they do this.
All you need is a badass extension cord.
Yeah.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Native Instruments introduces the new Complete 15 bundle, featuring Contact 8, offering versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative effects. Perfect for creating everything from emotional scores to dance floor grooves. Contact 8 includes exciting new creative tools like chords and phrases for inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth sounds. The Complete 15 bundle also includes updated Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro and AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is a repeat guest joining us here at Recording Studio Rockstars. It's Brian Murphree, a seasoned mastering engineer and founder of Soundporter Mastering, based just south of Nashville in
Spring Hill,
Tennessee. No other place that I may have accidentally said before. Brian's career spans over 15 years in the mastering field, during which he's dedicated himself to helping artists and mix engineers achieve the best possible sound. Since launching Soundporter in 2019, he's built a client list that includes Grammy-winning producer Boo Mitchell, Melly Baldwin, touring drummer for Justin Bieber, and a range of other artists, many artists. I mean, it seems like a tiny list. I'm sure you've done Daikaiju isn't even listed in this list, and that's one of you did a bunch of records.
I'm biased, so.
Yeah, that's cool. That's what we want to know. We want to hear about the cool stuff. And a range of other artists whose work has amassed hundreds of thousands of streaming plays. Brian's approach centers on delivering professional quality results while making mastering accessible for artists like yourself at any stage of their career. So Brian's journey began with his own experience in bands, where he took on the mixing and mastering roles to bring underground artists' sounds to life, often on a tight budget. We're probably all familiar with that. His supportive and collaborative approach makes him a trusted resource. It's weird doing the video thing and keep saying him and like you're right in front of him, but that's the way it is. Makes him a trusted resource in the music community, and he's passionate about helping clients to get the most out of their mixes before they even reach the mastering stage. Brian has also played bass with the surf rock band Daikaiju and the punk band Random Conflict, contributing to his deep understanding of the musical landscape. So Brian is somebody who really gets the technical side of how things work, but he also gets why the hell you should care if you're a musician and you're in a band and you just want to rock. So you can hear Brian's backstory on episode RSR495. And check out we have a YouTube playlist of cool music that he's helped to create, and all in the show notes. And of course, links to his mastering studio. So Soundporter Mastering. So please welcome Brian Murphree to Recording Studio Rockstars, back to Recording Studio Rockstars.
Yes.
Brian, are you ready to rock, dude?
I am. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you here, man. I'm happy
this is great.
to see you again. So Rockstars in full transparency, which you know me, I always prefer that if possible. Brian was here exactly a week ago on a Friday because he generously came over to help me figure out how to set up this whole video studio in here.
Yeah, it was just good fun to kind of experiment with the different lighting techniques and stuff like that. And so hopefully we came up with a good result. So
let us know, Rockstars, in the comments if you're digging the way this is all looking and sounding, because I'm trying to get it dialed in just right. So why is it that you even know about video?
Honestly, I grew up, I was growing up in the 70s. My dad had a Super 8, one of those silent film recorders.
Camera?
Those
Yeah.
cameras. So
You had to hold
I had
the
one of
handle
those.
like
I
this and
still
stuff.
have the projector. That we could watch those old films on. And I got interested in that for a while. But then, of course, it being film and with no lighting whatsoever, you couldn't do anything unless it was outside. So, I had to have good lighting. Fast forward in time, I started getting into just camera photography, probably in the mid 2000s. Actually, I take that back. I did get into photography a little bit with my dad back in the late 90s when he was shooting appliances for catalogs. And
Oh, right.
it was interesting to see that
mentioned that.
because can you imagine a 40 megapixel image in 1999? Most cameras didn't even...
It's called a close-up.
Yeah, it's just a very large sensor.
Right.
Okay, so this sensor, I think used, he found it somewhere for maybe like 23 grand. And the way it would take pictures, because you couldn't just take a color picture at 40 megapixels back then, you would have this rotating filter that would do a red, green, and blue image. And then Photoshop at the time, which was, I think, Photoshop 3, or Photoshop 4, I think was what we were on. It would assemble those images into one.
That's like classic color photography, isn't it?
It is.
Printing.
Yeah. It's really not that different. But, considering how large those images were, and can you also imagine the storage space that
Did you
took
say
up?
red, white, and blue?
Red, green, and blue.
Red, green, and blue. Okay.
Yeah. Which is, if you know television, CRTs,
Yeah.
anything
RGB,
that produces
right?
videos, RGB, yeah, red, green, and blue, and any combination of those colors, you can create pretty much anything. And
Is there an analogy to that in audio?
of
Of the RGB, combine that and create other colors. I guess that would be harmonics in audio or something like that.
yeah, probably. It's just really, it's kind of a simple way of creating every color that you can see. So if you think about it from turning up the green light all the way, you would see perfect green, but it would be at complete green brightness, right? But then if you add the other two colors and turn them up all the way, you would see white. If you turn them all off, of course, you see black.
Now, we have some lights in here that I can adjust, and even as I look at them, I can tell I've set one on me for one color, I've set one on you for slightly different, and then we're looking at the way our images show up on the screen, and I'm trying to see if I can balance it. It's all brand new to me, but it's actually kind of fun to figure out some of this video stuff and learn it. But back in the day, would they have actually had red, blues, and greens? Would be you just adjust those within lights, or would you have lights that would even have just reds, just blues, and just greens, and then you'd mix and blend them?
Well, they're originally taken as monochromatic photos. In fact, the 40 megapixel sensor that my dad used, it was a 40 megapixel monochromatic, meaning it's only black and white. It's only picking up the grayscale. And what you do is you apply that filter. That filter applies some information that Photoshop would pick up, and then it would translate that to green or red or blue based on how much light information the sensor picked up. So the sensor knows nothing about color, but you take those three images and you say whatever comes in as light, just grayscale light, and that equates to anything that shows up in there that's lit up, it's blue. and then it applies that blue filter to it, and then that makes the blue side of that image, and then you stack the other red and green monochromatic images to that, and now you'll have a real color photo.
Rockstars, you see why I like hanging out with this guy? Because he just seems to know something about everything. Well, that's not the only reason. But that's one reason. Now, so that's fascinating. So like you'd have light come in a lens, and then you split that light up into 3 sensors or
it's
something.
3 different photos
right,
that you're taking.
So you go, each time it takes the photo,
it takes the photo and rotates the filter to a different color, and then it takes
physically rotates it, and it's like, don't move the camera, anybody.
Yeah, it's like it's a big
or is
disc
it like
this.
Really fast?
No, it's slow. It'll take the picture. So these are all still photos, and granted, a washing machine is not going to move, so
right.
You don't have to worry about that. But it will rotate the big filter on the lens, so it sits on the end of the lens, and it will rotate that filter, take a shot, rotate it again, take a shot, rotate it again. And this was all automated. So you just press a button and it'll sequence through all that.
Don't anybody sneeze. Stop breathing.
Yes, basically.
You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of the time where you decide, you know what, we're going to record, we're going to break the drums up and record them that way.
Yes.
And you have somebody like, all right, now just play the kick part. Just play the snare part,
Oh, every breath you take.
Just play the cymbals after that. And then we'll like blend it all back together and rebuild the drum kit.
Yeah. A lot of 80s bands recorded that way. Like I said, Every Breath You Take from the Police. I know Stuart Copeland was furious about how he had to record that because, you're hitting a snare and you're having to hit it once every second. And I believe that was basically the tempo. It's like you just watch the second hand on a clock as you're listening to that song, and he'll be hitting the snare basically right on the second.
Wow. I'd heard that Stuart Copeland would also double his snare drum part. Like he'd play a snare on top of the drums, maybe in the Police. That was Stuart
He
Copeland,
could do it
right?
if he did that, he could. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of videos now floating around with him talking about how he played certain songs and stuff like that. And so it's really fun to watch.
I'm already out of coffee. I'm switching to water, man. I love drinking stuff while we're on the show.
That's right.
I hope you guys dig this one's. I figured this mug would be good to have in the shot. I have to cover my eyes. That's my daughter doing like a skydive off the diving board right there at the pool when she was little.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's so amazing what you can put on mugs these days.
Right. We were just chatting about that. I think you were saying you wanted to get mugs for your studio, and we get to talk about fun stuff like that because everybody who's listening has got a studio of some sort, and we all want to know good ideas for the studio. So
put a logo on one side, on the other side, you've been mugged.
There you go. Well, I feel like you'd put a photo of the client on one side, and then the other side would say you've been mugged. I know I see. It's like you've been mugged.
Yeah.
Like, here's my mug. Take my mug.
Yeah.
Have you ever made swag for bands or for the studio?
Only for the 2 bands, Random Conflict and Daikaiju. Of course, we made merch, all kinds of different merch.
Yeah.
I was usually the one that would handle, especially for Random Conflict, I would be the one to handle managing T-shirts. But there's other things like patches and pins and things like that. I don't think we ever got into like ball caps or anything like that. We have hoodies.
And you'd bring them, like the classic move was to print lots of something and then bring boxes of it and have to haul them out of every show.
Yeah.
And I guess you still have to do that, although you can have a digital store now at a show and then people just order the shirt and it comes later or something.
You could do that, but somebody's got to mail it out, right? And but we did have like a square up, card reader, tap, and all that stuff that you could use at the shows. And then I would have my iPad or my iPhone.
What's some of the coolest swag that you remember seeing, like whether it's for a band or whether it's for a studio?
It's hard for me to really pinpoint exactly what I thought was the coolest thing. But one thing that I wanted to do was one of our logos in Random Conflict is we call it the Smiley Bomb, and it's one of these. Have you ever seen Spy versus Spy from the old magazines?
Oh yeah, totally.
The little bombs that they would throw at each other. There would be the little circular bombs, and they would have a fuse. Well, I drew one of those and then put a great big smiley face on it, and then at the bottom I would put like this big like punk rock spike in its chin, and I wanted to make the stress balls a stress ball version of that, and then put, glue on the little spike and the little fuse and all that, and be able to give those away. And I thought,
that's
that
a good
would be
idea.
really cool. But unfortunately, nobody could really print the smile on it the way that would look right. So we had never approached that beyond that particular just investigation. So
yeah.
But t-shirts
cool
generally have been the big thing for us.
I did picks. I think the company was called Intune Picks.
Intune Picks, yeah.
And, there's probably a bazillion ways to do it. Some of this stuff, I feel like when you solve it the first time, you're like, I don't want to ever have to think about this again. Oh, I don't know if we're getting, I think I'm just uploading, so I'm getting a low res video for a split sec.
Yeah.
But, it's like, I feel like I figured out how to make t-shirts for the podcast. So actually, Rockstars, if you ever want to get a Recording Studio Rockstars t-shirt, we should have a link right in the show notes. There's a store. You just go there and you just like pick your size and color, and you can say, screw it, I want a hoodie instead. And
I'm going to do that right now.
You could do. I might take you, man. Yeah. And then I know I have it's probably rsrockstars.com/t-shirt or something like that. I think that takes you there.
It'll be in the links or
like
in the show notes.
When you figure this stuff out, I remember doing it. It was kind of a pain in the butt, and then by the time I figured it out, I'm like, I don't want to have to think about it again. So some of this tech we use for things like that, like it advances and it's like not wanting to upgrade your computer in the studio. You're like, I got this working. I'm going to stay here for a little while.
Yeah.
A lot of what we do is we take like big leaps when we're ready, right?
Well, sometimes. So now computers, of course, I would kind of geek out on something and say, well, I want to upgrade this. For the longest time, I had a Windows PC and would just upgrade the components as I went. Now that I've swapped over to the Mac, environment, I just kind of go until I know that I need to get more power because I'm losing time.
Yeah.
And that it's strange because a lot of people don't really calculate it that way. They just kind of go, this machine is working for me, I'm going to keep using it. But once it starts taking time and you don't really have anything else to do while it's cranking away, then okay, you know what, maybe I need to upgrade.
Right,
but like, for instance, the new Mac Mini just came out. It's really small. It's
it
really
looks
great.
Pretty badass, and the price points was like, I mean, of course, they always show you the price for the lowest version that you're immediately going to double the cost of or whatever.
Well, I know, like, if my parents ever need to swap out their computer again, we're getting a Mac Mini. That's what we're going to do.
And so to me, the joke is like some of these low prices, you're like, oh wow, so like the newest one, you mean it doesn't even have a hard drive in it?
Yeah.
Of course of course the price is low.
Well, it's a Stephen Wright joke especially about cameras. He said, I bought a new camera. It's very advanced. You don't even need it.
You don't even need it. Yeah,
and that's what's going to be, our reality.
I like his line about, I've got a map of the world. It's
1 mile equals 1 mile.
1 mile equals 1 mile.
Yeah, God, I could rattle those off all day. But yeah, when you're going back to the cameras and such, so I was just one of those kids when I was growing up. I took things apart. In the late 80s, I was fixing VCRs, and that wasn't something that I truly knew how to do. It's just I knew how to take them apart, and I would figure out what was wrong and then make an adjustment or do something with it that would work. Or I would have like 3 different VCRs that were of the same model, and if one broke, I could just take a little circuit board out of another one. I knew exactly what these boards did. Essentially.
Yeah. So you were a real tinkerer as a kid.
Tinkerer, yes.
That's I kind of was too. I mean, I specifically remember that we had a cousin. Thanks, Eric, who gave us all his entire old race car set. Like my aunt and uncle were probably like, we got to clear all this kid stuff out of the basement, So they gave us an entire racetrack, and then we brought it home, but it was all bits and pieces and parts. So my brother and I would it was the slot car racetrack,
Oh yeah.
So like we'd rebuild the cars, you could take them apart and take the engines and put them in, and that's like where I learned about. I didn't really learn electronics at that point, but I learned like how you just assemble these bits and pieces and how a little motor worked and all that stuff.
Yeah, if you were into RC cars, there was a friend of mine growing up around high school. He was really big into RC cars. I would race his RC car in my car. So I'd be in a real car and he would be racing me. Yeah, they were that fast. And other times he would be sitting in the passenger seat driving the little RC car. in front of us, and the thing could just leave us sometimes.
Yeah,
you know,
those RC cars are pretty cool. So RC for radio control.
Yes, radio control. But that's the slot cars were big in the 90s. If you've seen Pulp Fiction, when they walk into, I can't think of the name of the venue where they Jackrabbit Slims, as they're walking to the table, you'll see slot car racing going on in the background. And it's a thing that just kind of came and went, but it was cool, you know. But back then, yeah, I remember growing up and in high school having some places in town where they had slot car racing, and a friend of mine was heavy into it. So yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, let's see. Let me see if I can bring us back on track of.
I will get you off track.
No, sorry. Usually it's me who does it, right? You've got an awesome studio, Soundporter Mastering. You set up a great studio for, you know, I'd say it's you sort of cracked the code on how can you do the home studio thing, but have it be totally pro and pro sound and pro setup and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you sent over a video, so I thought we could try and look at this video, and you can kind of give us
I'll give you some context too. The context is that I built the house with the studio in mind. Now, granted, this was kind of a standard house that you could have built by a builder.
Yeah.
But there are certain things I did in the house as it was being built that was more conducive to the mastering studio. Like, for instance, isolated power. Because I didn't want the power that was going to be drained or interrupted by anything else in the house. If a refrigerator kicked on or appliances kicked on, it wouldn't affect that room. And then, of course, like the studs in the walls, I made sure the distance between studs was to my spec. There's some other things I probably could have done, but you know, in a standard home, it's kind of hard to do that. But in the room that was built, it was built. That was what was going to go in. It was essentially a mastering studio. Yeah.
And this was is it a first floor, second floor?
Second floor. It's kind of like over the garage area.
At iZotope, tone shaping is topping the charts. Meet the Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Plasma's flux saturation technology brings dynamic warmth and depth to your mix. Aurora takes spatial audio to new heights with lush adaptive reverb, while Cascadia adds exciting delays to your mix, retaining clarity through its smart unmasking feature. Get 10% off Plasma, Aurora, Cascadia, or any of the iZotope plugins with the special code ROCK10 and make your mixes rock at iZotope.com. Now, are there benefits to having a floor that translates below, like where low frequencies can escape through walls or floors or any of that kind of stuff?
Steve Albini, yeah. He had in his studio, he would have the little exit vents where low frequency could escape. My room doesn't necessarily need that, but interestingly enough, because the floor is not cement, it is a kind of not necessarily a floating floor, but because it's suspended from wall to wall, and there is space below it, any super low frequencies can be absorbed by the floor. But the biggest thing is I can feel it. And that was one of the things that I was kind of okay with, because I kind of thought maybe I really want a cement slab and put it on the first floor.
Right, like Bob Ludwig Gateway Mastering. I mean, there's like
his room is strictly built for that. Yeah,
yeah. The speakers are on. Were they Egglestons also?
Yeah, they're Eggleston. Well, his first speakers were Duntech Sovereigns, the big 7-foot behemoths. But then Bill Eggleston Jr. Built the very first set of Eggleston Works Ivies, which are also 7 feet tall, built those strictly for Bob Ludwig. And they're speakers that are, I think they're probably, I don't know, a little under 200,000, I think, if you were to buy a pair.
And those ones that he built for Bob were the ones that went into that first iteration of Gateway?
Serial numbers 1 and 2, yes.
I saw them. I stood right in front. I listened to them on them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they sounded amazing.
I wanted to go do that. I took a trip recently to New England, and I passed by his studio, but it's already closed and he's already retired. So I have no idea where those speakers are, but I would love to.
They were like speaker stands that were pile driven down into the bedrock, so that the speakers were on, main bedrock, and they weren't attached to the room that they were in.
Yeah.
So they're like decoupled, I guess. That's the word to use.
Yeah. And now those speakers are very inert.
And
themselves.
lobsters would crawl through the floor and stuff like that.
Yeah, actually, they were inside inside the speakers. Yeah,
that's great.
No,
they're like
great.
A fish market. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, what's interesting about those speakers too, and you can actually go to the listening lab in Memphis.
Yeah.
And hear a set of those 7-foot Eggleston Ivies. Now, here's what's interesting about those. They're very tall, but when you sit and listen to a set of speakers, generally you want the tweeter, especially if there's only one tweeter, you want the tweeter to be about ear level.
Right.
Well, those are up here. They're up about a foot, maybe a foot and a half above where your ears would be when you're sitting and listening to them.
So do you jump a lot while you're listening?
No, they're built, again, for Bob Ludwig, who mastered, predominantly, he mastered standing up, or he liked standing up while he was mastering. So those speakers are built to be at ear level for him while he's standing up mastering at his desk.
Wow, I never heard that. So what was his logic on the standing? Was it just like an early version of a standing desk? Just like, I don't want to sit down all day.
Yeah, he didn't want to sit down all the time. That was just how he was comfortable. But when you've got a large desk like his, I mean, it is easier to just kind of step and be able to reach instead of having to reach over a table sitting in a chair. It's kind of uncomfortable. I think he probably still had chairs, but he would largely...
clients like sitting.
Yeah, I mean, the clients would like sitting.
But now, so now that I'm thinking about it, back when we did our interview in the studio, which is where I think we did our first interview. Did we do 2 already or 1? I can't remember.
We did 1 before.
Just did 1, right?
And that was before you had your changes, your improvements.
Right. And I might have still been doing a standing podcast at that point.
Yes, you were standing.
I was standing. Yeah, I used to stand all the time on the podcast.
Yeah.
And then I was like, all right, I'll sit down.
Yeah, I might as well.
I'm not trying to get lazy about it.
No, but you have to be even with me now.
That's right. And now we've got this whole new challenge, which is the camera. So the camera would be, I would think the lens would be at eye height.
Yeah. And so people would be staring here instead of, I'm up here.
Yeah. Which of course, so much of what we do with doing, laptop cameras are always looking up our nose and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
so
that always looks.
Think about that, rock stars. Get a good frame. If you ever need the camera to make nice eye contact with you in your studio, just take your laptop and just set it up on a box or stack of books or something like that and bring it up high when you get invited to be a guest on Recording Studio Rockstars.
Right.
All right. So let me see if I can pull this off. So now you sent over a video. Oh, it might be I might have the one that has sound in it.
Well, you can mute it.
Maybe we'll find out. Right.
Yeah.
So let me
I have a lot of cussing
here,
in it.
and we'll see. Well, fuck, I'll probably cuss while we're doing it anyway. But let me see if it'll play. I don't even know. I've never done it like this before.
It'll be a first.
Just uploaded the media and then
go ahead and see what happens.
It says playing live. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
All right, great. So now that's gorgeous. So what are we looking at? Why don't you just narrate over this?
So this is my room. Right now I'm just showing the acoustics of the room. And like I said, you can go back. I don't know if you can scroll back to back through the video, but we can always try that.
Yeah, you want me to back up to the start?
Well, I mean, like you can go back and pause at certain things, and we can cover.
Oh, yeah, I can do that if you tell me when to pause.
Yeah, so you can pause right there. So you can see like this 11-foot ceiling. It's slanted. And this was an interesting thing when it came to acoustics, because I had been asking on different forums and different experts, is there a problem with slanted ceilings? And a lot of novice acoustic experts, I guess you could say, would say, no, you should not have that because you can't calculate what your room's going to do. I agree, you can't calculate it. But what's interesting is that some of the experts, the actual experts, would say, no, slanted ceiling is not that bad, because when you have reflections that are hitting off of that ceiling, they're going to go in different directions. So if anything, it could help you. The only thing that I had to be careful with here is that if you can actually see behind the diffusers that are hanging from the ceiling, Behind
like
those
right
up
here?
high.
And I don't think you guys see my mouse, though, unfortunately.
You might not be able to, but between those dark gray diffusers that are hanging down, you can see some bass traps that are up in the top.
Yeah, they're like thicker white
Yes.
blocks up there.
Right. Those are smaller, but they are bass absorption. They're about 7 inches thick, and they can absorb some of the bass that collects up in, the bass pressure that collects up in the ceiling.
So in a way, having a apex of the ceiling actually is like a place to focus all the bass.
Yeah,
so it makes it a little easier
anything
to
that goes
collect
up there can be absorbed to some level, but it can also be up there where my ears aren't. I'm not sitting up there, so I'm not hearing that. And as long as it doesn't reflect back to me, that's fine.
Right. Well, so like for example, a regular ceiling, like we're in this room, typical square room, it's the corners that are bass traps. But if you do
That's right.
a vaulted ceiling, then it's that peak. You could really like do a big cutoff of that peak.
Yeah, and you can see that my ceiling is flat, so the corners are really 45-degree corners instead of 90-degree corners, right? So that helps a little bit.
Hey, did you ever consider making the ceiling part actually acoustically transparent so that the entire flattened area is actually just the beginning of a giant mega bass trap that goes right all the way up to the point of the
I probably could have done that, but it would be crazy to try to hang a huge bass trap up there without actually building it into the infrastructure.
Right.
But measuring the room, there's no problems, and I don't need to do that. So that's a good thing.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
So shall I keep going?
Yeah, keep going a little bit. So you can see.
This is fun, by the way. It's fun to be able to just see it. Oh, we got to describe it for the audio only listeners.
Yeah.
All right. So basically we're swooping around his mastering studio, and we just looked up at the ceiling, and now we're looking down at the mastering desk there, and you've got like these red pillows so you can sleep on there.
Yeah.
What are those right there? They look like red
Acoustics,
pillows on the desktop.
So if you can see the desk has like a plank of wood that's about 6 inches wide and probably about 5 feet long. What happens is without those pillows on there, and Bob Ludwig had pillows on his desk.
Really?
Or just there were pads. Okay. If I take those off, there is a little 200 hertz spike in the audio that bounces off that desk and hits my ears. And it's so minor. I troubleshot that for weeks. Could not figure out where that 200 hertz bump was coming from. And once I just put something on it, I just asked myself, like, maybe it's reflecting off of this one thing, because in major studios, a huge desk would create a lot of reflections coming off that desk. And they would say, well, that's a big problem. You just have to get used to it because you've got a big desk. But these pillows take that last little 200 hertz out. And then when I measure the room, it's fine. It's taken care of.
That's wild. So I noticed in my studio, the way it used to be set up, my speakers they were near fields, and they would come to my ears where I was mixing, but then they would also go down and bounce off the top surface of the console and up to my ears.
Yes.
And when I did a little measurement, I noticed, I think there was like a 200 or 250 dip right there.
And it was canceled.
It was canceled, right? And so then I was like, I wonder what would happen if I just took one of my little panels. I just had these panels with one sheet of 703 on it, and I just put it between the speaker down to me, like a little ski, ramp coming towards me, so that it was essentially blocking the reflection that was going off the console. And you just saw the dip just go, just flatten right out. It was incredible to see that,
Yep. Yeah, in fact, there is a 46 hertz null where sitting at the sitting position, that 46 hertz null, it just cancels out that frequency, and so you've got that dip there, and I want that resolved. So I don't know if you can back up just a little bit and look at the back corner of the room.
I don't know if it's showing us a preview.
There you go.
There. Okay, great.
That's perfect. Those are some big soffit traps that I ordered from GIK, and those absorb. Those are there to absorb that
So it's
one
the
frequency.
back corner of the room. It's just
That
a
is
big,
the back corner. It's a big bass
giant
trap.
bass trap, just tuned for a specific frequency.
Well, it's not tuned, but it's it absorbs all bass frequencies
Right.
up to the Schroeder frequency, which is about 150 hertz or something like that. But they are reflective, so they have reflective plates on them, so they don't necessarily kill any of the other frequencies, mainly just bass. But they will absorb all of the bass in those back corners, and that 46 hertz null was reduced. And I would use an SPL meter. I would play 46 hertz through a frequency generator and measure that with an SPL meter and at my desk. And when I saw that come up, I knew that I had those bass traps in the right position.
So that's interesting. So the bass traps are trapping all bass frequencies, but the result is that they increase a bass frequency at the mix
because they're not
position?
canceling out the bass coming directly from the speaker.
Oh, so let me see if I follow this. So typically that 46 hertz was reaching the wall, bouncing back to the mix center,
And it would
then
be out of
canceling out.
phase.
And by having a bass trap there, it's now going to the wall and it stops there and doesn't come back to you. So therefore
It
it's not
minimizes it,
canceling
yeah.
out. Wow, it's such a cool way to think about it.
And Bassworks, this is interesting with acoustics, is so high frequencies above the Schroeder frequency are reflective, kind of like sunlight.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so you can
Like
shine a laser.
ray theory.
Yeah, like ray theory. Or think about a pool table. You know, you hit a pool ball and it bounces off the walls. But it's Schroeder frequency below that, and when you get into bass frequencies, they're pressure-based. So they don't necessarily have a reflectivity to them. They're pressure. So if you want to absorb a bass frequency, you really have to have lots of treatment,
Right.
lots of thick treatment, because it's going to be pressure against all of your walls basically evenly.
You're basically trying to slow down a lot of air movement energy.
Yes. And
Whereas
so,
the reflective stuff, the panel that just sort of prevents the speaker from bouncing off the wall near it, it doesn't have to do that much work on it, on the energy.
right. And that's why like
Sound wave.
basic foam, you know, like the egg crate foam that you can buy, the RLX stuff, it's just like it handles like high frequency, but it's not necessarily enough dense material to absorb low frequencies. And this is why you need like soffit traps, bass traps. And in fact, if you wanted to absorb frequencies, you could just start with bass traps and leave them as full range. So they'll absorb bass, but they'll also absorb all the high frequencies too. But some of the bass traps, and you can kind of see one behind that green chair there. That one has a diffuser plate on it, where it doesn't absorb high frequencies so much, and mid frequencies they'll kind of bounce off, but they'll kind of be dispersed in a way.
Okay.
So that creates bass absorption, but I don't want to kill any of the higher frequencies. I want those high frequencies to not be tamed too much because they're fine.
Yeah.
If my room doesn't need that absorption, then I don't put it there. But there's two that would be behind my chair that'd be the same bass traps, but they don't have that reflective plate on it, and they will absorb all frequencies essentially.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. All right, well, let's keep going. I bet people are dying to be like, I want to see this video. I want to see the rest of your room.
Yeah.
All right, so press play here and see what pops over.
And you can pause it right about there. I guess we can go over the desk real
Okay,
quick.
so we're pausing it right now. We can see a shot of the desk. We see 2 rows of rack and like a little screen in the center. And so like it's sort of the middle or the edge of the rack is right down the center. So you've got a rack of gear on the left half and a rack of gear on the right half that just both meet exactly in the middle. So it looks like you have super easy access to the gear.
And that's the
record.
idea. Yeah, that's generally the idea. And one thing's interesting too. So large mastering studios, especially the major level mastering studios, and Bob Ludwig is one of those. When you see one of those desks, they have a couple of compressors, they have EQs, they have saturation units, they have different pieces of equipment in their
custom
desk.
built in the tech shop, right?
Some of them
corner,
are, like Brian Lucy's got some equipment that's you can't find this equipment really, and it's tailored for his mastering chain.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what I've done is I picked and chose some components that really worked for my flow. But if you can notice in there's not a single compressor in that chain. The reason is because there's so many different compressors that you can choose from that may be right or wrong for a session. And so I leave those all in the box because compression is not it's not what I would go to in an analog world necessarily. In fact, a lot of compressors out there are either, like VCA type compressors, like an SSL 4K,
right.
or the Shadow Hills compressor, that great big behemoth, that's like 6U,
Yeah.
You can have one of those things, but you quickly fill up a desk and make it where you can't reach it.
Right.
So for mastering, I didn't want to do that. I only wanted to use my desk for character and color, or maybe a little bit of saturation. So the only things I've got in the desk are my converter, which is in the upper left. That's a Crane. That's a Crane Head 192. Then below that is that's an Elysia envelope, and it's designed as a transit shaper. Sometimes I'll use it for that, but I like using plugins for that more.
So in other words, you could bring out a little more punch from a drum or something like that.
Yeah, I can do that. But I honestly, I've got plugins that do they have a lot more flexibility.
Yeah.
So I end up using this. This is actually an incredible little Baxendal EQ. So if you think of like the Dangerous Audio Baxendal EQ,
Elysia also.
yeah, that one it can be a transit shaper or a Baxendal EQ.
Oh yeah,
whichever
so,
one you want.
And Baxendal EQ is essentially the really simple one. It's sort of like low shelf, high shelf.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's pretty much.
And then
right.
you can tailor what roll-off frequency each one has. Yeah.
Yeah.
Below that is an SPL Gemini. What this is just a basic processor for splitting the channels into MS mode. That's mid-side. And for anybody who cuts vinyl, you'll know exactly what that is. That means anything that's in the center or everything that's on the sides, not left and right, but mid-side.
Right.
And so if I want to process the mid or process the sides, I can split it up and switch to MS mode with this unit. And you can see in the video there, it's already set to that.
Now, so translation, Rockstars, like, what does that mean and why would you process it? I feel like musically that probably translates to what's in the mid. Well, usually it's like voice, kick and snare and bass.
Yeah.
And then what's on the sides? Guitars.
That's right. Mostly guitars.
So it gives you a level of, that's one way to think about it. It's like, it's a little bit of control over the rhythm section versus the harmonic, the voicing instruments.
Right. The Gemini also has an effects loop on it, and the way that it works is so I start with the converter coming out of the computer. On the far right-hand side, you can see a little Mo2 8D. That's just
I should play it because I think you go over to that side.
I might, yeah.
At one of these
Yeah,
points,
you can.
You come back again. We probably got lots to look at, but there's a point at which you really
that I focus on.
You really zone in on the desk. Let me see if I can get to that.
You can just let it play until you see it again.
It's so cool to see all of that. Look at his basses. You get your basses, reel to reel.
I play bass. Yeah.
You got your little therapy couch for people who are like,
okay, pause it.
And then you go, oh yeah, that's
so
great.
You can see the little 8D.
So in the black box right there. I totally
it's a little
know that
black
from
box,
the plugin,
half rack, Oh, you're talking about the HD2 black box.
Yeah. I've got the
plugin
Brainworks version.
I do too.
Plugin Alliance, and it's the only time I've ever even used it. So it's kind of cool to see the real one and be like, hey, that looks just like my plugin.
Well, I'll talk about that one in a second, why I love that hardware. But my signal goes from the computer to the 8D, the Mo2. And that's just a digital router. That routes it over
on the upper right.
Yep, that routes it over to the Crane. over AES, and the crane converts over to analog. Then it goes down to that Gemini, that SPL Gemini. That goes into an effects loop, which covers the Elysia, Baxendale, and then the Chandler curve bender at the bottom. Now, when I split it into MS mode, of course, now I can do EQ with these two pieces of these two devices. I can do separate EQ for mid and sides. And so when I'm doing any kind of a boost for those, I can do it individually, and that's usually the way I like working.
Yeah, I've heard about the curve bender, and I know the TG Chandler stuff is incredible sounding. You know, the TG1 was the compressor limiter I had experience with in the past, where I was like, it just did a thing that seemed like.
Yeah, Wade, who designed the curve bender, he, I believe, has a great collection of a lot of old EMI gear. And so he knows how to make his equipment sound like modern versions of this old EMI gear. So he gets to electrically measure it and then duplicate it, replicate what was done with modern components. And if you actually could open up one of these things, I wish I had a picture of it. If you opened up one, you could see how much pride he takes
just in the wiring and everything.
In the wiring and the PCB layout and all of that stuff. It's a gorgeous piece of equipment inside and out.
That's wild.
Now the black box is after that. The stuff on the left-hand side, the black box occurs after that. What I've done in this black box was I swapped out the saturation tubes with some Holland Amperex
with some
1965
groove tubes.
Oh yeah, groove tubes. I don't even remember what came in them. And Black Box said, well, it shouldn't make that big of a difference, but I feel like it does. But these are Holland Amperex 12AT7s. Now the plug-in emulates a 12AX7, which breaks up quicker. It distorts
that's more
quicker.
of a guitar amp.
Yes.
Preamp choice, right?
But this came with AT7, so I put AT7s in it, but these are like some 1965. One is a Bugle Boy tube. Which they're pretty hard to find, fairly expensive. But the saturation that this unit has is just gorgeous. It does not break up nearly as quickly, and it just does what I really want to hear.
So in the first video of this you sent me, you were sort of talking and going around the room, so I got a little bit of a sneak peek on this. Now we're explaining it as we go. But the black box in that one, you pointed out, you had mentioned that the left side is like even harmonics and the right side is odd harmonics or something.
Yeah, I believe that's right. The pentode is one, it drives the next stage, which is the triode stage. Okay, so there's two other tubes that are in the back of the unit that are the stock units. I think they're like some Phillips tubes or something like that, but they sound great. You first start out with the input. You've got the saturation circuit, which you can see there's a bass, mid, and high, and then a saturation knob. So the saturation is a separate circuit. That's the two tubes that are in the front, which you can see through the vents, kind of.
And then I feel like on the plug-in, there's an alternate tube.
There is here too. There's an alternate
tube.
Switch, and that just switches to the other tube.
That's cool.
So, but it drives that one a little harder than the first one.
And you can sort of select the frequency range you're going to drive stuff at, right? You can drive the lows, drive
the mids,
the whole
and
thing,
and the highs.
It's sort of lows, mids, and highs, not
pretty much
lows.
Well, I think it is full. It may be full, yeah. But then you've got the pentode stage. And this adds. This is actually an amplifier stage. So if you turned it all the way down, it's not going to produce any signal. So you are actually going through the tube. It's not just mixed in or added harmonics.
Right.
This is actually going through the tube.
And that's the way the plug-in works too.
Yeah, if you turn it all the way down.
But
now the plug-in, of course, you have a mix knob that's separate.
Right.
And this one doesn't have that,
And I don't remember
obviously.
if there's an auto gain feature or something or anything like that.
Well, this one, if you don't have the pentode halfway up, then the triode's not going to get any signal.
Mm-hmm.
But you can add...
And is halfway typically
That's the default state,
It's default, but it's typically thought of as like you're neither adding too much nor taking away at that starting default.
You're not really pushing it too hard,
Right.
And that's their...
But it probably you probably still hear it just going through. So now would you use something like that when you're mastering? You would actually like engage it or disengage it and decide which way you like kind of on a project. So you could engage it in a default state and immediately decide, I like it, I don't like it.
Yeah.
And so is that, talk a little bit about that too. And how do you do that in a mastering process when you're working on somebody's record? Are you making big major changes to their sound, or do you find yourself making lots of little incremental changes and then quickly judging them and just moving forward quickly like that, where you're like, a little bit of this, like it, don't like it? Okay, move on.
Yeah, my philosophy is most mastering engineers, I think, kind of follow this as do no harm. My philosophy really is understand the spirit of the song, understand the passion. Where is it coming from? What's it trying to convey? And take that, understand it musically to a point where when you're going through these steps, that you know what's actually doing something positive and what's doing something negative. So yes, there are some slight changes, but my goal is when you level match the mix with the master, in my opinion, you shouldn't really hear a huge difference. There should be a slight difference if it's something you want, but it should not be so major where somebody's going to go, well, okay, yeah, it's much louder, but it sounds way different. I'm not retranslating something else that is my interpretation of the mix. I want to understand it from their point of view, and then I want to bring it up to a commercial level. And if I add something to it, I'm doing it in a way where it's going to be so subtle that you really won't know that it's there. But if you took it away, then you would go like, yeah, you know what? I do like that better.
And that's why it's so key for you to have a mastering setup where you can hear that clearly and you can immediately judge whether you're making these smaller changes that are improving things.
Exactly.
Stuff like that. All right. Well, let's keep zipping forward here. So I'll hit play and see where we, just tell me when to pause.
Yeah. Let's see. Probably. Yeah. So I'm talking about the 8D there. So this is the one that I'm actually talking in. So I think I just got it muted. But I just kind of go through the sequence of things there. So, and then I go back into the computer after the black box and then I capture. So I'm doing a pitch and catch where I have my DAW set where it will play on one track, go through the analog chain and be captured on another track.
Yeah.
That is just
what's that thing at the bottom, that box that just says HPA4 on it?
Okay, so that's made by a company called Benchmark. They were well known for their digital to analog converters.
Uh-huh.
But this one is a really good headphone amp.
Part of your Trinoff too. You said you have a Trinoff setup.
Well, I do have a Trinoff above the Motu 8D. Yeah, but the this right here is really my room controller. So it's my volume knob. And what's interesting about it is it's built on relays. So there's, I think, over 200 relays inside the unit that when you turn it up, you can actually hear the relays clicking on and off. Especially when you hit the little dim button, it drops at 20 dB. You can hear all the little relays clicking down. So, and the whole idea there is that a potentiometer, just a standard pot, when you're turning it up and down, it may not exactly be on the left and right channel perfectly even. Well, that's what this is to solve.
Yeah, I've got the Dangerous Audio's Monitor ST.
Yes.
It does the same thing, but ironically, it's also a demonstration of the opposite. So the headphone volume is not detented. It's actually just like a little, what would you call it? Just an analog.
Just an analog smooth swipe.
Potentiometer.
Yeah.
And sure enough, when you try and get down into the quiet level, it starts, dropping in and out in the left. So it absolutely does that right there. But the speakers are on the stepped thing. So you have this remote control and you do it and you can hear over on the unit. It's like switching through the.
Well, and this one is also stepped, but it doesn't control, like it's not, it is a stepped knob. And I mean, you can just keep going around with it. And it's also an inner knob. So you can actually push it and it'll open up other functions or change things however, but it has two outputs. Like it has a headphone output and then it has a speaker output. And this is the rack mount version of it, but it's a very well-regarded headphone amp in the audiophile community, as well as being a good source for their amplification or any amp that you would use. And I just found this was just a phenomenal piece of gear for just controlling the volume in my room, and then being able to swap to different sources, because you just alluded to the Trinoff earlier. If I'm listening on headphones, I don't want to hear the trend off because that's doing room correction, right?
For the speakers, yeah, for the speakers in the room.
So I can just, on the little screen here for the HBA4, I can just go to the second setting, and that switches it to headphones, and it's just getting a different signal that is coming from the trend off that's bypassing all the room correction and going into my headphones unaffected.
Awesome.
So that's what that's good for.
Rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring the new Contact 8. This comprehensive collection includes a fantastic range of versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative studio effects, giving you everything you need to bring your music to life. Whether you're composing emotional scores, deep dance floor grooves, or experimenting with sound design, Complete 15 has you covered. Discover powerful plugins and instruments that guide you from the initial idea all the way through to the final mix. The included Contact 8 introduces exciting new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a cutting-edge hybrid instrument that merges organic and synth sounds in real time. Plus, enjoy revamped versions of Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro to take your sound to the next level. Then polish your mixes off with the AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11 included in Complete 15 bundle. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, rock stars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Brian Murphree from Soundporter Mastering, joining us here at recording studio Rockstars HQ. Dude, are you ready to jam?
I am.
All right, so let's just jump in and we'll keep rocking on this video where you're giving us a tour through. I'm going to let it play for a second.
Yeah.
Because I know there's some cool stuff you show us. We'll see some of the speakers. We'll see the amps in the background and stuff like that. And I love the fact that there's a PreSonus 1 fader right there, a fader port.
Yeah, I use that for my for operating Wavelab.
And that screen.
So the speakers back there,
awesome
yeah.
too. And I like the colors in the was that a fake like fried egg on the floor for a dog toy?
Yeah, it's a dog toy.
That's really funny. And then you see the Eggleston speakers in the back there.
Yeah, those are Eggleston Andra 2s.
I think we're back at the desk here. Oh, and those are the pillows that you were talking about.
Oh, there's that.
And what's that screen in the middle? That's part of the Trinoff or no? Oh, that's DC Electronics.
Yeah, it's just the meter.
Oh, that's great.
Yep. So I use that sometimes. It's not something that I use profusely because Wavelab has great metering. Oh yeah, these diffusers.
Yeah. So let's pause here because you were talking about these diffusers. And
so these are interesting because I wanted to build something that would be conducive to the color scheme that I'm after, which is kind of a magenta, red, white, gray, and black. So that's sort of my color scheme. And I wanted to build something that was kind of a diffuser for that. And at some point I kind of thought, you know what, I want to use this as kind of like a background to my head when I do videos because that would look really cool. But I started realizing, well, if I'm going to do something useful, I need to put it up on the wall where it can actually have some functionality. But I don't really know how functional these are, but
they look cool.
That was the whole thing. Was you walk into the room and you'd see these up on the wall, and
didn't you say that they're
really cool.
They're
mirror images.
Image puzzle?
Yep, they are a mirror image puzzle where every block is at the same height, but a mirror image of itself on the other panel, and the same color, except for one block. So there's one block on there that is different. That was your
wabi sabi.
Yeah, that was just my kind of like puzzle perversion, I guess you could say, where it's just like I have.
That's a really good name for a store.
Puzzle.
If you decide to go into puzzle marketing.
Yeah, so that's the thing, and I geek out about that kind of stuff. When I grew up, I used to draw mazes, like extremely complex mazes.
Yeah.
And I was just so fascinated with that kind of stuff. So I thought, this was just something fun to do. It probably took me about a month to build those. And they were just the materials and everything I put into it was probably about $450, including a bandsaw blade that I burned through cutting all these dowels.
Well, it's fun to build stuff.
It is. It's fun, yeah.
All right,
and it was a lot of fun.
Let's keep rocking here and see what else we get. See a little bit more of the puzzles.
Yeah, I think I stuck on that for a little bit.
There we go. Oh, yeah.
Now, this is one thing interesting, too. You can pause it right there, I think. But you notice the windows. A lot of studios would say, why would you want windows like that in a studio? Right. And when GIK Acoustics looked at the room, they were advising me to put those soffit traps up there. They thought that was where it was going to address
block
that,
out the windows or something.
to block out the windows, but to address that bass issue that I mentioned earlier. And I put them all up there, and they absolutely had no effect. And in fact, if you stick your head into the window, you can hear 80 hertz pretty profusely. But when you back out into the room, they have no effect. And one of the things I realized was the windows are offset from the wall. So they kind of change the phase of anything that's hitting those windows. The windows themselves will kind of absorb some of the bass.
Well, because the bass just simply travels right through them.
Well, it doesn't really travel through them, but it does vibrate them slightly because of the pressure. But because they're double pane glass, and because it's glass, it's going to just absorb it slightly. But because it's offset from the wall, and I have bass traps laying down on the floor in front of the wall, it does enough to absorb any bass that's there. It stays there.
Yeah.
And I don't hear it. So
That's
acoustically,
cool.
it worked out pretty
That's
nicely.
cool.
And I was
Now
like, so now I can have the windows open, see sunlight while I'm mastering.
And it looks like you got a big screen that you can see what you're doing and working from. That's just like on a stand in front of you or something.
Yeah, I used to have an up close monitor, and I actually had it before I had an actual desk with analog gear. I had it slanted and sitting on my desk as if it was like one of those Ravens.
Right. We were actually
Raven
at Alex
screens.
Iwana here, and we were talking about the Raven.
I would love to have one of those, but they're not. I don't even think they're 4K. They may be now, but I don't like touch screens. I just like to have a screen that's kind of down. So when I would mix, like Studio One or something like that, you could see everything there, and your head would be facing downward.
Naturally,
so
almost like you're working on something.
Yes, and it was better for my neck. It was better for my neck, and I did
plucking your vegetables from the garden.
Yeah. Well, it's just one of those things. Like naturally, your head should not be like this. So if you're hunched over and you're doing that, it hurts your neck after a while. So this kind of gave you better posture, I think.
I used to have a setup like that in the studio with the old mixing console where the screen was up high on the wall, and I had to clinch back to look up, and it would hurt so bad.
You get sore after a while.
Editing. You really notice it after like a couple hours of computer editing or mixing.
Yeah, but I also had the slant to allow my ears to see the speakers. And that sounds funny, but the ears need to be able to have a direct line of sight to the speakers, so you don't have anything blocked. And so I had the screen down like that because when I had it up, it would block the speakers, or at least half of them. And so I just decided to do away with that completely and move to a larger screen, pushing it further back. And then now I can, of course, I have to wear glasses to see it clearly.
Right. Oh, because I'm nearsighted. Right.
Yeah. So I have to do that, but that's a great trade-off. And now I've got this big screen, and it's off the desk. I don't have anything on the desk that's a screen, and so I don't have to worry about any reflections from that or anything. So
ironically, for me, it's better having the big screen away from me because it's more like having giant print, Yeah. Because I have to have the reading glasses when I get up close. It's like an either or. It'd be great to have a screen like right in front of my face where I can put the glasses on and just stay that way, or far away. And it's also frustrating that like I kind of need glasses for the keyboard, but I don't need glasses for the screen. So sometimes I get caught.
Yeah,
halfway.
Progressives. That's what these are.
All right, so let's see. It moves around the room a little bit more. You see some of the bass traps towards the back.
Yeah.
And your awesome collection of basses. And there's the speakers again. And a nice place to lounge. And then I like those traps up on the top ceiling too, with the perforated things. What are those called? Do you know? Oh,
those are like diffuser panels as well, because again, it's one of those things where the high frequency was not necessarily an issue because of the slanted ceiling. High frequencies aren't really an issue for that ceiling because they'll just bounce off and go straight to the floor or to the ceiling or wherever. And on the floor, I've got a great big rug that absorbs its wool, and it will absorb high frequencies that bounce off the ceiling, so I don't have to worry about high frequencies as much.
Yeah.
And then finally, the Trenoff. So the Trenoff, I used SonarWorks for a long time, and I found great results with SonarWorks just by itself. But there's some challenges with using software and dealing with phase correlation. So because if there's a slight issue with where one speaker is versus where the other one is, or where frequencies bounce off the walls or whatever, you can't really deal with phase cancellation, or not phase cancellation, but phase correlation in a software plugin or a piece of software. There's just not really a way to do it because of software latency.
Right.
In the hardware, because this is what Trenoff does, is they can deal with that phase correlation, and they can deal with the difference in speaker power, like how much signal is coming out of the speaker. So they can deal with that. They can deal with phase correlation, and then of course EQing the room. So after I've done the acoustics, and I get the acoustics as good as possible to where I can listen to the speakers in the room and they sound fine. But when I measure the room, I start seeing some small issues. Nothing that crossed over about 9 decibels in either direction. So it was pretty close. And so you have that last little 10% you need room correction for. So that's what I did when I bought the Trenoff. That pretty much dealt with that. And so like that 46 hertz null that the bass traps in the corner, they solve some of that, and the Trenoff kind of takes up the rest. And now it's a pretty flat signal from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz.
I heard the Trenoff when I was at AES in New York, and I was hanging out with those guys at a party, and they just had it set up in an ISO booth. And then, I sat in the room and played a mix, and then they're like, and here's what they're on, and they just turned it on. It was like,
it's like, boom. Yeah.
It's just like everything was just like a camera just going into nice focus.
When they're doing some really cool stuff with what they call waveforming technology, where you put some subs in the front of your room and you put some subs in the back of the room. And what you're doing is you're playing bass through, you're playing low frequencies through those front subs, and the back subs are absorbing that bass. Okay, why would you do that? Well, so what happens is, like where I've got a 46 hertz null in the back corners of my room, I can correct that with soffit traps. But if you have those bass, those subs in the back of the room, the front ones are putting out that frequency, the back ones are absorbing it, so you get a perfectly balanced bass frequency through the Trenoff system using that waveforming technology. Now,
yeah, that's interesting. Again, it's going back to the thing we were discussing, where it's about the frequency going to the other wall and bouncing back to cancel itself out in a spot that's the problem. And so if you can create the frequency at one end of the room and it travels past you, but then when it gets to the other wall, the canceling thing sort of catches it and stops it rather than sending it back, then you get the frequency you want in the listening position.
Yeah, there was another company called Ava, I think, AVAA, I believe is how it's spelled. They have like a soffit trap, an active soffit trap. You put it in the corner and it kind of does the same thing, but what it's doing is just measuring what it's receiving and then pushing out that same frequency.
Yeah.
So it kind of does that, and it really is supposed to, and I've never heard one, but it's really supposed to act as a very large bass trap in the back corner. And I know that anybody I've read or heard that has used those have said they're pretty good.
Megan Gohill actually might have some of those in his studio. Megan, if you're listening to this, let me know. Drop a comment and actually let us know if you do. And then we had
Bob Katz, I know, uses.
We had a guest from the Netherlands who I think was talking about doing that too.
Yeah, but now waveforming technology that's what Trenoff is putting forth. So if you use a Trenoff system, you can license the other ports and then start using the sub, so you don't have to buy a separate solution to do that. It's all built in. So that's kind of what they were aiming for that. But yeah, and it's been great to have the unit. And I will say this, one of the things that I've noticed with the room correction especially, and having the acoustic treatment, and this was something that we were even talking, I was talking to Jim Thompson of Eggleston Works about this, and he says, one question I get a lot of is coming from people who have bought the speakers. They want to know, what should I do in my room? And, he's a speaker builder. He's not an acoustician that's going to go and treat people's rooms. That's not what he does. But we talked about that, and one of the things I noticed, even with his speakers, is that the soundstage increases. So you can hear sounds that really appear outside of where the speakers sit. Normally in a poorly treated room, you can point to the speaker because it's making a lot of noise, especially if the speaker's not inert. In other words, the speaker cabinet's vibrating. These have granite on the sides, and they're very, very thick, very, very thick MDF, and then they're covered with plexiglass. So they're very inert. If you knock on the sides of the speakers, you don't hear anything but just the impact of your knuckle. So the speaker doesn't resonate there. So with that, and then coupled with the acoustics in the room, you can hear a really good soundstage and a good phantom center. And that's why I was always telling people, like, you should always get your acoustics right before you ever spend money on a good set of speakers. It's better to buy a cheap set of speakers in a well acoustically treated room than it is to buy a great big pair of speakers in a room that's not treated at all.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, you think about instruments like, well, you just think about the human voice. Like we've all got different levels of quality to our voice, but if you put somebody in a really cool sounding space with a stairwell that's got a cool echo, it's a lot easier for any of us to sound a lot more interesting in that moment,
Yeah, and it even makes this sound better, in an acoustically treated room.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially for podcasts, like you're saying, just by treating
the ceiling,
the walls, and the walls here and everything. And shout out to you, Carl Tad. So all I did was just try and like copy a little bit of what we had done in the studio.
No, but I mean, that's the thing. It's like it's solving the problem of what you've got, because you're not playing music in here. You're only talking. So you only need to deal with what the voice is really putting out, unless...
And there's plenty of echo in here too. And I even became a lot more acutely aware of it. In fact, I could have done with tons more.
And it's almost almost a perfectly cubed room, which they always say is the kiss of death,
with the doors wide open too. Leave the doors open and stuff.
That does create a little bit of a soffit trap there.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's see. We've taken a look at your studio. Talk to us a little bit about, what you do there. When you remind us again what your process is working with clients and stuff at Soundporter.
Yeah.
And then I do have some more other questions we'll jump to. We got Kevin White gave us some great questions about your music.
I was hoping he would.
Bands and
So, the fun thing about mastering is the fact that I don't necessarily have to worry about the size of the project as much as a mix engineer. Because I'm looking at a finished product, essentially. It's already mixed. It's a stereo mix. And when I receive it, the first thing I'm going to do is listen to it and kind of make a judgment call on what I think it's probably going to need. Or should I reach back out to the mix engineer and make some suggestions? And this is not unfamiliar territory to even the biggest mixing and mastering engineers. They do this because if there is something that does need to be fixed, even if it's a mixed decision, sometimes it's just asking a question of saying, I noticed something in this mix that doesn't sound like the mixes I normally get. Is that intentional? Because a lot of mix decisions are subjective, right? So I have a back and forth communication initially with every new client that comes in. I open that communication and I want to either tell them, yeah, your mix sounds great. I'm ready to master it. I will look forward to it. If I think that there's something that needs to be adjusted, I will immediately respond and say, everything sounds good, but I think you probably should take a listen to maybe the drum cymbals. The cymbals are just a little bit over the top. They may be a little hot because, as you probably know this, a mix engineer that has spent an enormous amount of time on a mix gets jaded to certain things, certain decisions that were made early on, and you may have just accepted it, but then you get a fresh pair of ears that hears it for the first time, and they may go, oh,
right, they're
that's
saying
a little hot.
This thing's distracting me from where I think you're trying to take the music. And I like the way you communicate it to the band too, where you're not like, this sounds good or bad. You're like, I'm noticing this quality to this. Is that what you were going for?
Yeah.
And I find that's a useful way to make production suggestions in the studio too. It's like, hey, I noticed you guys do this after a chorus. If you, I might have an intention, I don't want to take an hour to get to the point, and they don't want me to do that either. So I might be like, I've got an idea. Would you like, any feedback if I'm feeling it? Okay, well, if you were to hit an octave lower on the bass on the downbeat of this chorus or whatever, that may expand the frequency range and give it more impact. Are you going for that? Or if you play that high note, it might have less impact there. And is that your intention?
Now, I try to stay out of the producing side of things because obviously that's a different rate that a producer would charge. But what I try to do is I try to think, okay, how is this going to translate on a set of speakers? case in point, I've got a band that this is actually one of my first customers, and I've been working with them for a few years, well, several years now. But I think that they are getting better at what they're doing. But they sent me a mix, and I thought, man, this sounds really, really good. But, and as I alluded to earlier, the cymbals are a little distracting, and so rather than just going back to them and saying, okay, well, I think the cymbals are a little distracting, they may not be completely certain about what it is that I'm referring to or whatever. So what I did was I said, look, can you send me a stereo mix of the music in itself and send me the drum bus as a separate stem? That's what they call it when it's just a stereo output of just the drums. Okay. And I will put those together, and I will say, I'll take the original and I'll take this, and then I'll say, okay, let me figure out how much to tell you to bring the cymbals down. And so I said, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you re-export the mix, bring the overheads on the drums down by 3.5 dB or 4.5. Give me two versions, whatever. And then now I can make a decision based on my feedback, and they're going to get a great master because of that. And that's one of the reasons I offer the free feedback, is because if I can get the mix, if I see something wrong or I hear something wrong with the mix, and if that can be fixed and the artist or the client agrees with that, if they think, yeah, no, that's actually welcome feedback, we want to do that, they make that change, bring it back to me, I don't have to spend as much time with it in mastering trying to adjust or correct for that.
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music, like the new iZotope Plasma plugin featuring flux saturation, which helps you sculpt the harmonics in your sound, enhancing the excitement and clarity of your tracks and mixes. And Ozone, with its built-in mastering assistant, helps you analyze your mix, suggesting all the settings you need for a professionally mastered result based on your chosen style of music and EQ curve, or reference a specific song if you want. Ozone features sophisticated yet simple modules like clarity and impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, allowing you to adjust the settings to your taste so it sounds incredible. And with the magic of master rebalance, you can even manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums separately at the mastering stage. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, RX, or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. Yeah, and not to misinterpret what you said, it's not about spending time with it or not spending time with it. It's about getting to the finish line. You're just trying to get it to that point of sounding great.
Yeah.
And if backing up a step and making a suggestion that helps the mix come to you sounding better, so that you can then carry it over and carry it into the end zone, so to speak.
Yeah, it just means that there's less compromise that has to be adjusted for. So if there's another artist in particular that sent me a great mix, everything is just amazing, but the vocal pumps everything just slightly too much. Right. And I think it's because the release on the bus compression was just a little slow. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, go back and adjust that. If you can just give me just re-export the mix, but speed up that release by 50 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds or something, and then re-export it, and I'll show you what I can do with that. And that may be something that I can do. That really what it's doing is if I don't have to compensate for that extra processing, I can just say reduce that processing, send it to me, and then let me add what processing I need to add to get it where you're going. But I have to understand the spirit of where they're going with that.
Right. It's all about the spirit, man.
Yeah.
So is it possible sometimes that a client, if that compressor was the last thing on their chain, that they might send you the mix pre-compression and then you put a compressor, the same compressor, if it's a plug-in or something? Does that ever happen? Or is that sort of more complicated than it really needs to be?
Well, there's two schools of thought on that. One is send me the mix as you want it to sound. Get it sounding as good as you possibly can get, and send me what you've got. I don't care what it sounds like, but send that to me. Another school of thought is to send me the mix without limiting, without the extreme bus compression. Send me that mix, but then send me the cooked one that you have so that I can use that as a reference. And then I can get it to that point, but I may have a better method or a better set of tools to do that with.
Yeah.
So I will play in both of those sandboxes because I will feel that having the mix as exactly as you want it. I'm working on a blues record right now that is exactly that way. There's very little I can do it because it is very cooked, but it sounds good and it sounds like exactly what they want. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to make it translate as best as possible when it goes to vinyl or when it goes to CD or to Spotify. I'm going to try to make sure that it performs well. But
and I've experienced that as a producer and a mixer myself, where I'm like, there might have been things that just, there might be indicators or overs or clipping lights and things like that in our process where I'm like, we're pushing that too hard. But then when we'd go back and undo something, I'm like, yeah, but that just doesn't have the thing.
That's
anymore.
right.
So
Yep.
so it makes sense that it's good that you have this ability to respect that, where it's like, sometimes when we create, it's like we're creating up against a problem, but that's just the deal.
Well, that's like going from, sometimes I've even received mixes that were 16-bit. And I say, hey, can you send me the 24-bit version? But because 24-bit has a greater dynamic range, the 16-bit actually sounds better because it was kind of crushed a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's just like, so I think there's even a plugin that's called like a bit clipper or something like that, where it just changes it to 16 bits just for that effect.
I remember working with Tom Lord Alge, and he was talking, I think, about the early iteration of the Sony digital machine versus the 2248. Is that what it would have been at the end there?
Yeah, I don't remember.
And maybe it was a 44.1 versus 48. But if I'm remembering it correctly, it was definitely like a lower bit rate or a lower sample rate versus the other. And he made that comment. He just said, yeah, sometimes, with those other ones, it's got this thing for the mid range and, It adds like a crunch to guitars or something. And I was like, it was fascinating to hear that,
Yeah, and there's some like converter experts and such you find these videos on. There's one speaker builder or DAC builder out in Colorado. He makes a lot of videos, and I forget the guy's name slips my mind, but he talks about converters and why people choose certain converters over others, and why would you think 16-bit would sound better than 24-bit? And a lot of it has to do with the surrounding electronics.
Right. Yeah. Even as I said that out loud, I'm like, I just described two different tape machines, so they might have had totally different designs and
different amps and different heads, just everything could be different. And so that's one of the things that sometimes it's just the character you get out of it. Sometimes that's just what does it.
Right.
And
that's why we have a variety of guitars, and where you're like, yeah, that really nice Paul Reed Smith or gorgeous, relict Strat is not the right one for this part because I really want this funky K guitar.
Yeah.
Because it's just got the sound.
It's just got a certain character that you're looking for. Yeah. So, and in mastering, I will take that with, at face value. So if somebody sends me a mix and they're gung-ho with that mix, even if I think maybe that mix is a little overbaked, or if it's just, something's just not right about it and I don't really feel like I can do anything with it, I can still just kind of go, look, I'm going to at least give it the best treatment that I can give it. And then I'm going to do the QA process and all of that, and so that they can release it on whatever platforms they have, because they made the music and they're the ones that count. Right. All I'm trying to do is just translate it onto whatever speakers or headphones or earbuds, whatever that people are listening to, so that it doesn't hurt their ears, it doesn't fatigue their ears. And if I find something that I can adjust, like for instance, an overcooked mix and a hyper compressed mix, that the kick drum just doesn't have any punch whatsoever. So one of the things I've tried to get better at is bringing out that kick drum, that, that kind of punch from the kick drum.
Yeah.
And the low end on a snare. To be able to do that, it's just something I've got to film a YouTube video for. But
what was the Baxendall slash
the envelope
transient.
You can do it with that, but I use it's a company called DMG. Dave Gamble. I think he's British, but he produces some mastering grade plugins that are very lauded. Bob Katz in his mastering book on the cover is the DMG EQ. But they have a plugin, I think, seems like it was Bobby Ozinski who even bragged about it, but he was like, this is one of the greatest plugins out there right now. It's the DMG Multiplicity. And it's kind of an all-in plugin. It can do pretty much everything. And it was so exciting to be able to use this that I made a video that walks you through the whole thing. And when you watch that video, you'll be like, I cannot believe that there's one plugin that does all of this. And now you can figure out how you want to use it. So one of the videos I need to film, but it's a trick that I use quite often. It's using that plugin. It's using dynamic EQ to bring out the kick drum, just that punch at the right frequency, and then also the low end on the snare, so you can kind of feel the snare a little bit. Growing up, if you think back to the 80s when we had all these boom boxes, they didn't have a whole lot of bass to them, but you had a good, huge snare sound in the 80s, right? And you could feel that snare coming off those little speakers, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of those things I look for. If the snare is anemic, if it's just too brittle and it doesn't have enough meat to it, it doesn't have to change the character of the snare, but it can bring it out a little bit, just enough where your earbuds can reproduce that so that that snare is there and it's present,
Just a little fist coming out of your earbuds, just punching the eardrum.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's the thing.
Painful.
It does, but it's like,
do you ever get fitted for those in
the IEMs?
Either in-ear monitors or for earplugs, the fitted kind where you could pop the little filter on?
Oh yeah, I've gone through, I think, one set of those, and I just felt I was going to lose them.
Yeah. Did you remember the process where they fit you for it, and they have to like stuff a little? It's like this little tampon looking thing that they put down in your ear with a string coming out.
It's like a locksmith.
They fill it with goo, and then they can pull it out. And the process of that little foam thing going all the way in there and going around the bend, like close to your eardrum, was like, oh my God, that's so painful.
I do a wrong thing with Q-tips, so I clean my ears with Q-tips sometimes.
Oh, you're right. They're like, don't ever do that. And you're like,
they tell you don't,
They're like, don't stand by the bathroom door while you're cleaning your ear with a Q-tip.
Yeah.
There was somebody told a story. God, was it Roger Moot? No, he told a story in the studio of, this is so gruesome. It's a story of somebody in the studio who was by the control room door, and he's standing there like holding a pencil or whatever. Somebody walked into the control room door, hit his hand, pencil went right in the ear.
Yeah.
Took out his eardrum. Even me just doing it.
It's scary.
Yeah.
I have to be careful. Yeah. When I've got a Q-tip in my ear, I'm looking around and I'm making sure that nothing is nearby. And I stand up because of the dogs, if they were to jump up and hit my arm or something,
And you do it while you're driving in the high-speed lane in traffic and a construction zone,
I don't do that. I don't do that. I'm very, very careful, very, very gentle with that. But yeah, I unfortunately, yes, I do. They do go in where Chandler Bing from Friends is going to say, you have to stop it where there's resistance.
That's so funny.
But you can hear it on the eardrum as it's twirling. Yeah.
Oh boy,
it's dangerous. But yeah.
All right. So let's see. So that's cool. Your process of working with people on mastering. What are some typical questions you get from people about that? Well, actually, I don't want us to run out of time too. You want to talk about some of the band stuff you've been doing? Or do you want to stay on the mastering topic for a minute?
It doesn't matter to me, whatever you want to do.
Well, let's jump back and forth.
Okay.
Right, so we got some great questions in from Kevin White too, who's been a guest on the show also.
Great guy.
Kevin, he knows about stuff like NASA and the history of music, the convergence of music and NASA, two things you'd be like, what?
Yeah.
So very cool stuff. And you've played in some really interesting punk rock bands. You have toured with Daikaiju, which I learned about from you guys, basically. I didn't really know anything about that world. But Kev had a couple of questions. He said, to ask you about getting punk bass tones and how to make the bass more audible on iPhone speakers when you're recording, mixing, mastering.
That's a very good question. Yeah, that's something I strive for. So it doesn't matter what bass I play. I always use new strings, and that's one key. But there's a couple of things that I do. Now this is just me personally, because the basses that I play and the bands that I play in, I always shoot for the same sound. I have the same tone no matter what bass I'm playing, but there's certain things that I do to my basses that are not necessarily things that you would do if you were going to play in, let's say, a church or something, because it announces itself. Having been a big Steve Harris and Rush fan, it's like, or Iron Maiden, Steve Harris. I wanted to make sure that the bass was very heard, not just heard as in present, but it really announces itself. It actually takes center stage.
Yeah.
One of the things I do is I lower the string height so that there is fret buzz. I am looking for fret buzz. If I hit my open E string, it's fret buzz all day long, but you still get enough of the bellowing boom from the string that it makes the tone that you want, that you can hear the notes, and none of the frets are, higher than, you don't get any dead notes or anything like that. But I play pretty hard. So that's another thing, is I play hard, bright strings, a little bit of fret buzz. And then playing through equipment, I use a tube pre, because live I have an all tube rig. It's just an all tube head that's like 300 watts, straight tubes. But my recording gear would be...
Why not 400 watts?
Yeah, well, they can't fit enough tubes in there. And they can't build a transformer big enough for it. But recording, I use an old... it was a company called Daring Audio. It's a friend of mine that built some pedals. And in fact, I was trying to help him locate a company, I think it was up in Kentucky, that can mass produce these pedals so they could be sold to like Sweetwater or Guitar. What was the musician's friend? They could be sold online, but I think the cost of the upfront investment was going to be pretty great. So
right.
It just wasn't something that he was interested in and just continuing pushing forward. But the pedal that I've got that I use for recording is called the Edge Activator, and it kind of has that Sans amp kind of feel.
Right.
But it doesn't bother with the low end. Sans amps will kind of make your bass sound like it's being played through an Ampeg, the big fridge, the 8x10.
Yeah.
So the bottom end is very Ampeg-like. The top end is kind of bright and sizzly. Well, this kind of takes, it leaves the low end alone, but it brightens up a lot of the punch of the bass. So it gets that like bite to it. It gets a real grit.
And I've heard that described. Obad Khan, who has Khan Audio, and designed a bunch of the early Crate tube amps that sounded so great.
Yeah.
When Crate finally did that, he had an AC30, and I saw his guitar, and it was like one of the greatest. You remember the first time you go in and you see a band, you're like, oh my God, that tone, that's incredible. Like, what is it? That was one of those moments for me.
Yeah.
And talking to him about it, he pointed out that it broke up in a way that it left the low end of the strings alone, but it broke up the high frequencies.
Yeah.
And then the more I thought about it, I was like, oh yeah. So every time I'm doing something and you hear the low end kind of break up, it can sound like it's mushing out, and that can potentially make you feel like you just killed the low end in something, right?
Yeah. And, it's funny, you kind of mentioned that, and it kind of makes me think of Chris Squire of Yes. His bass tone was accidental. He had a Rickenbacker. It was a Rickenbacker's 1964. And because of the back pickup having something wrong with it, and of course he's cranking that up, and somehow that just kind of gives his bass that tone. So his bass
Didn't he play through a Marshall stack?
He did. Yeah. And I can say I have witnessed what it sounds like when that Marshall stack goes out on stage.
Oh, because it's still got a bass amp along with the Marshall
He's got
stack.
a bass amp. Yeah, he's got a bass amp, but then he had the Marshall stack for the top end. And that Marshall stack, it was 2004, I think, was when Rick Wakeman was back in the band, and they were going on tour for that. And they were playing in Atlanta at Lakewood. And during, I think it was close to the edge or something like that, his Marshall stack goes out. And then you just hear this thuddy bass under it. And it's just like, that's not Chris Squire.
Wow.
And when they got it back, when they powered it back on, you get that Marshall playing through. It's like, yep, there he is.
So that's wild. So what reminds me of hearing you describe the fret buzz on your low E string, Chris Squire's bass tone with the Marshall, all that stuff, is this thing that I remember learning in synthesis class the first time around, which is understanding the envelope of a sound and how you have an attack of a sound, and essentially this is the preamble to like, why is there a noise circuit in a synthesizer,
Yeah.
Because you've got like this complexity that happens in the attack of a sound, and then you've got, the quick decay, and then you've got, or whatever the decay is, and then you've got a sustain of a sound. Yep. And then usually, often as an example, you'll see somebody show you a violin and a piano, or, whatever, two somewhat unrelated, not drums and something, but like two sustaining instruments. And then they'll just cut off the attack of both and play you both sustains out. And you're like, wow, they sound almost the same. And so you discover that the tone of and sustain of the instrument gives you all these references like pitch, frequency, weight of the sound and all that. But it's that initial attack of sounds.
The velocity.
Which has all the identifying information in it.
Yeah.
So when you describe the fret buzz on the low E string on a bass, and when we think about things like adding harmonic distortion to basses to bring them out, a classic one would be like, how do you hear an 808 in a mix? Well, you got to start adding saturation and distortion to it and stuff.
Yep.
Is that it's that low frequency stuff that gives us all the weight in the mix, like his amp going out, but it's the highs, which is, essentially a representation of the transient moments and the initial attack of a sound too.
Yeah.
That gives you all of your identifying.
And he also talked about how he picked, because he played with a pick, but the way he would do is hold the pick on his thumb and he would pick the string, but then his thumb would also kind of thump the string right behind it. And I thought that's kind of interesting that he was doing that. And so that's a Chris Squire thing. It's like hardly anybody could duplicate that. But I will say this, and for Kevin's sake, to go look for the Band Geeks. These are some guys that play with John Anderson, formerly of Yes. And I just saw them at the Ryman recently, back in June or July. I think it was in July. And so these guys, the Band Geeks, what they're trying to do is recreate that early 70s Yes sound, but to do it today. Whereas the original members of Yes, they just can't play that way anymore. They can't, of course, Chris Squire and Alan White are gone, and Bill Bruford won't play drums on tour anymore. But these guys play like early Yes. That's cool. So it's really crazy to see what they're doing. But the leader of the Band Geeks is the bass player. And he has a YouTube video where he will go through his entire tone to recreate that Chris Squire signature sound. And he did it.
That's
and it sounds, they put out a new album and you can listen to it and you're going like, man, that sounds like Chris Squire.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of fun. But yes, and a lot of the Random Conflict stuff, even though I play different basses throughout some of that, you can still tell the signature is there. You can still tell that overall aggressive sound is still there.
Do you feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for more of a simple and straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mixing system from Grammy-winning mix engineer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix in your home studio that will sound great everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. That was absolutely the most helpful and informative block of information and mentoring on the mixing process that I have ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up pro tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, I'm so confident that this will help you take your mixes to the next level, that if you can't get a killer mix in 30 days, I'll give you a refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the ultimate snare mixing trick. And hopefully I'll see you in the front row of the Grammys. So now, most of your answer here about the bass tones audible on an iPhone speaker has related to you need to rewind back to before you even track it or pick up the bass and start playing. What about when people haven't done all that? What about when you're getting something at the mastering stage? Is there stuff that you can do to help bring out the bass guitar if they didn't quite get there? Or if you suggest them to go back and do some mix adjustments on it?
Yeah,
what's some feedback that you find is useful?
Well, distortion's obviously helpful. With bass especially, distortion is good. And so sometimes what I may do is I may say, look, you can send me the bass as a separate stem. But don't send me the mix without the bass. Leave the bass in the original mix, but send me the bass track. So I can line it up in my DAW and I can do some things with the bass to bring it out that way. That's one thing. So even like a kick or a snare, I can do that with that kind of stuff too. It's not often, but sometimes I'll get that. But otherwise I can send back kind of a recommendation. Say, okay, we'll brighten this frequency. Sometimes you can grab like the Waves SSL EQ, the little GEQ that they've got where you can just kind of sweep the frequencies around and then figure out what frequency that is that brings it out the best. And then just send that EQ setting back to the client and just let them listen to it with that setting. And then they'll hear what I think sounds good. And then they may think, yeah, absolutely. That's great. Let's just print it. We'll print it with that. And because what I can do is I can listen to it in context with the whole mix. And then send the suggestion back so they can remix the original bass, send me the mix, and then I'll master it.
Right, that's interesting. And now is that partly because you think the final result is probably better if that EQ move is done as part of the remix versus you doing an EQ move and adding something additively onto the final mix as part of your mastering
Right,
process?
because anything that I do is going to affect the entire mix, right? So if I do something, I have to be very, very careful, which is one of the reasons I love the dynamic EQ and transient shaping is because there's certain things that you can get away with that audibly you don't hear it. It doesn't compromise the rest of the mix because we're being very careful with attack and release and EQ frequency and things like that, where I'll give you an example. I want to bring out the top end of a kick drum. Well, I can't just trigger off the top end of the kick drum and bring that up. But like for the plugin that I use, I can trigger off the low end of the kick drum, but use that to dynamically boost the upper frequency that I want from that top end of the kick drum. So it's boosting the entire mix at that point, but it happens so fast that all you hear is that attack, that click or whatever from the kick drum, but nothing else comes through, even though I am boosting the entire mix.
Fascinating. So the kick is in the mix. Unless you said it was a stem, but the kick is in the mix, and you can use that as your key.
Yes,
is the low end body of that kick drum happening, but then you can have that key just the upper frequency of a dynamic EQ to just for that moment, just as fast as the beater's happening, have the whole mix just EQ itself just a little bit right now.
Yeah, it's just like selective side chaining. You side chain a compressor and you can trigger off of a kick drum to do something else. It's the same thing. So it's got this was multiplicity. So it's got a little EQ on the side chain that it uses internally. And you set the trigger frequency to be 50 hertz or something like that.
Right.
You set the threshold so that only the kick drum transient comes through. So the bass is not kicking it. It's just that. And you set the attack and release so fast that because you only need that high frequency from the kick drum.
Very quick. You
only need that the little basketball sound, right? So you only need that. So you only need to trigger off like the first 30 milliseconds of that kick drum. And then you need to get rid of it fast. So you can have like after after 50 milliseconds, I bring it back down. You don't know it ever happened.
Okay, so now here's a tough, maybe a tough pushback question. In that scenario, is it possible that the beater happens first on the kick drum head, goes into, should be hopefully picked up on, and then a moment later, the low frequency is developed out of the kick drum to get recorded and show up in the mix? In other words, if your sidechain is triggering off of a filter of that 50 hertz range, are you almost picking up on the sidechain information a moment too late?
Yeah.
For the beater? And are there tools that or ways of doing this that allow a compensation for that somehow?
Well, it's fast enough that you don't really pick up on it. And what I can trigger off of, if I think it's too slow, then I can move that trigger frequency a little higher. So I can move it up to 100 hertz. And as long as I'm only triggering off that transient, then I'm getting a sooner frequency because now I'm up in the 100 hertz range. So that's going to be closer to the beater head.
Right.
So if it makes a difference there, then yes, you're right. But chances are I haven't heard any instances where it became a problem.
Yeah.
And 50 hertz is pretty quick.
It's pretty quick.
Because especially where they're miking it, because they're miking it close. So even though it's 50 hertz, they're still pretty close to that beater head where sound's not going to travel.
Yeah, and if I think about 50 hertz, that literally is saying like, okay, picture some air moving back and forth 50 times in 1 second. Is that too slow for you? And you might be like,
well, think about it this way.
Yeah.
If you're triggering it off of a room mic, which is where most of that low frequency is being picked up, okay, yeah, that could be a problem because that's several milliseconds.
Delay,
yeah, that's a little bit of a delay. So I can go a little higher frequency in the triggering frequency to make that compensation. But otherwise, there's not really a good way to compensate for that other than just try it and see. But also, too, the frequency that I'm boosting in the upper mids for the kick drum are not so much that you're going to say, oh, wow, that's really coming out. If I really want that, it's probably going to be like a death metal band or something like that where they want that click. But they've probably got most of it in there. All I'm doing is just accentuating it slightly.
Tiny bit, yeah. And in my own example that I was making up right there, you could always just duplicate a track and shift it forward just a moment and then feed that on the side chain. And that's sometimes the way it's sort of like you create a pre-delay and then you have look ahead features.
But now that would require me to ask for the kick drum track, right? So I would
couldn't you do it on the whole mix and just filter all the lows and then
No, I have done that. Yes, I have filtered out just the frequency I need so that I can trigger that kick drum and run that into like a subharmonic generator.
Yeah.
Where I can add a little bit of kind of that kick drum frequency. I've even done this, had to do this because the kick drum was just so weak and they couldn't go back and retrack.
Yeah.
That they had to mix it as best they could. And they were like, look, we have no budget for this. So is there anything you can do this? So I did bring in like slate drums, trigger, and put in a little bit of a punch in there, but it's not really like if you were to listen to trigger by itself, it would not sound like a kick drum.
Right.
It would just sound like that frequency kind of being accentuated.
It's like filling in a little bit of the gap in the frequency.
So you still hear their kick drum, but you hear this other little frequency that's happening. I think Boz Labs, has a plugin that will do this as well. It's like a little subharmonic generator, and it will add low harmonic frequency to a kick drum. And there's another one
Bigfoot and Bigfoot 2. I love that one. It's great.
Those and Brainworks just put out another one called, I think it's actually I can't remember what it was called. It was like Boom something or whatever.
Yeah. Boz Millar's been a guest on the podcast.
Has he? Yes, he has. I remember listening to that episode.
He's a really interesting dude. And he has always been very inventive about the plugins he makes.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's another question from Kevin too. He said to ask about Daikaiju's DIY pyrotechnics. In their live show, they take destroying the set to a whole new level. They set the drums on fire and various dangerous stunts. It feels similar to watching a Jackass stunt.
Yes.
What are some thoughts that come to mind when you think about that?
Well, when you see them live, now granted, this transformed after I left the band in 2006. They transformed into kind of a new beast, and they wanted to amp up the show a bit. So can you imagine crowd surfing a drum set? And
not exactly, no.
Yeah, but they do this. So their drummer he is crowd surfing because they're holding up his seat, I believe, his throne, and they're also holding up the drum set. And he's up there hitting it and whatever, and they're spraying, lighter fluid and whatever else. They set the top of their van on fire.
Good
which
Lord.
I can only think, how long is that going to last? But they keep doing it. But they're crazy enough, they take the show outside. So like they're playing on stage, their amps are still on stage,
right?
But they'll go outside if their guitar cords and whatever will reach out there, and maybe they'll carry the amps too. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how they do this.
All you need is a badass extension cord.
Yeah, but they'll do this and they'll just carry it out. And the audience helps them do this because it's part of like getting the audience involved in a show, which is a great idea.
Yeah. Makes shows fun.
But yeah, I always fear like spring water here. It's like I always feel like, man, they put enough lighter fluid on that drum set. It's like watching those ceiling tiles going like, but the owner loves them.
Yeah, so the Spring Water is a great club here where I've just seen all the interesting punk rock stuff I've seen at the Spring Water.
Yeah.
And I noticed you got your Exit In sweatshirt on today. You played shows there as well?
I've played some shows there, booked a couple of shows there. I booked Sloppy Seconds on a Monday night, and I think they had 110 people pay to get in. And after that, the lady that we worked with that booked us on that, she was just like, look, I mean, if you want to book another show here, feel free. And I was like, that's so odd just to have that kind of invite from a venue that I used to love going to back in the 90s. I watched Garbage on their first tour there. I've seen, like Hate Breed,
what do you remember about Butch Vig playing drums and Garbage and like his get up there? What was that like?
Oh, everything was so loud at that show.
Yeah.
But I also saw them recently.
Were they a band that played with tracks at that point, and that was like a new thing?
He was obviously there and playing, but they had tracks, like some digital tracks and things like that they'd play along.
And that was probably Frank Sass doing sound for that show.
I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah,
that was
he was
so
there
long
in the
ago.
90s. He was great.
That was like 96. So it was
R.I.P. Frank, but he was this really awesome live sound guy at Accident for years and years and years.
Yeah.
He'd beat you up when you got in there to play a show because he loved it so much he wanted to make sure you sounded great.
Now, there was a guy at the end, a guy named Brad.
Mm-hmm.
It was right across the street.
Brad used to 10 bar, I think, at Exit In, and then he started the end.
Yeah.
Across the street.
Well,
I think
this was a guy
Bruce,
I thought.
Who owns it?
I don't know if it's the same guy, but I could have sworn he also ran sound for like REO Speedwagon in the 80s or something like that.
All I remember is when REM first toured, and I forget who they were opening for. Everybody kept joking about him. They were like prank calling. They're like, REO Speedwagon.
REM Speedwagon. Yeah. I'm sure they never lived that down. But
it was going back to the 80s.
But what I was getting to with Brad was that this was a Daikaiju show as well, and this was when I was with them. We played a show at the end, and he was setting up the sound and everything, and the guitarist, who was the main guy in Daikaiju, he called out to Brad, and he was just like, "Hey, how does everything sound out there? Does it sound okay?" And he goes, "Well, of course it does. Otherwise, I'd fix it."
That's hilarious.
It was like he always had just some kind of sly comment for everything,
That's awesome. All right, so let's see here. Let's see. I'll do another one. Kevin said, ask about violence in the punk scene. He imagines random conflict had its fair share of sketchy situations.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, let's see. Actually,
how does that carry through to the mastering process at this stage?
Oh, yeah, that's a strange one. That carries through because we always recorded ourselves. I actually learned on an O2R to mix and then bought a little AW4416. Huh?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know.
It sounded pretty good. It was just hard. You had to push a lot of buttons, as I remember.
Well, see, that was the thing. That's what I learned on. I didn't learn on a grand console. The studio had a great big Tascam before that. And I mean, I kind of got used to it, but it was, I didn't didn't know anything about it, but the O2R I could get into because it had all these other effects and things you could add and such. So then I bought an AW4416, and I just learned I wanted to record, because the studio that we recorded at, my first band, and then of course Random Conflict, the mixes just came out sounding too sterile. And I thought, why don't I just pay this guy to let me sit here and mix?
Classic
so I did.
Storylines. So great to hear those.
Yeah. And then so I just got more interested in that, and then eventually kind of translated into mastering, because we had to figure out how do we master our stuff. And at the time, I didn't really know what mastering was and why you needed it. I just knew I needed to make this sound great so that it was burned on CD in SoundForge, and we would release that. That was my earliest introduction.
And then would your
into
releases be, self-pressed CDs that you would sell by
a lot
hand?
of times. Now, the first Random Conflict album was a glass master. So it was like 1,000
Don't
copies.
throw rocks, don't throw stones in glass masters.
Yeah. So, and then as far as the shows, the scenes and such, my very first show with Random Conflict was a little place called the Brick House in Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that. Next question is the Alabama and Memphis punk scenes.
Yeah. So there was some big like Nazi king of Alabama that showed up to that show.
Really?
And this is a guy, I think he has there's some HBO documentary back in the day that talked about him, or at least included him in it. And this guy was just dancing around to us playing. And I kind of thought, I had no idea who this guy was, and then didn't even find out about this until later. And we had a song at the time that was kind of like, "We Know Who You Are,"
Yeah.
And it was like, it was about people like him. And it was just like, he didn't even know that he was dancing. He was dancing to this song that really is kind of a punch in the face to people like him. It was just,
Wow.
Anyway, so that was probably one thing, but we've had our share of, fights that would break out.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say and then the next day, the headline of the paper is like, Random Conflict hosts,
Yeah.
They make it sound like you host the.
Oh, they didn't know who we were. I don't even think of
rally,
Birmingham.
a Nazi rally or something like that.
Yeah. They wouldn't have known anything like that, but yeah, there's some shows have gotten pretty rowdy. We've had one in particular where our drummer saw a guy in a wheelchair that was being attacked, and he jumped out from behind the drum set and just ran out there and broke into the fight.
What compels somebody to attack a guy in a wheelchair? I guess people say shit to each other.
People can say, yeah, they can just go off. Yeah. So, but the mistake our drummer made was like, well, wait a minute. What if you get injured? We can't finish the show.
Right.
It's like, come on, think, but he was reacting to something that was an injustice, and he knew it, and he knew the guy and all of that, and he just wasn't having it. So, but yeah, there's always fights that have broken out.
It's the name of our band.
Yeah.
For 15 years, I had a famous MCI console at my studio that originally came from Criteria Studio C in Miami, where it made some of the most iconic Grammy-winning records of the 1970s. And it sounded incredible. When I was ready to upgrade my studio to a full digital mixing setup, I teamed up with Rick Carson at Make Believe Studio, Metric Halo, and Golden Ear producer Bill Simzik to recreate the legendary MCI console as the new MBSI plugin. The MBSI captures the same iconic sound used on multi-million selling records like Hotel California for the Eagles, Saturday Night Fever and Staying Alive for the Bee Gees, I Shot the Sheriff for Eric Clapton, We're an American Band for Grand Funk Railroad, and the soundtrack to Grease, the movie, all for legendary producers like Tom Dowd, Todd Rundgren, and Bill Simzik. The MBSI plugin not only delivers the authentic sound of the original MCI console faithfully, but it also adds new features like a top-notch compressor, overdrive, and a dual EQ filter switch, adding tools that Bill Simzik said he would have loved to have in the original console. Now you too can get that Grammy-winning MCI sound in your home studio. Whether you're recording or mixing, you can experience the sound of Miami 1976 with the MBSI plugin and soak up a little sunshine in your sound at makebelievestudio.com/MBSI.
And then we've had a lot of shows where the mosh pit was so intense where I would have to run behind the drummer a couple of times because they were coming at me. And I'm like, the microphone's going this way, I'm going back here, and that's just
right, because these probably were places without a real stage too.
Yeah, a lot of times we were playing on the floor. Yeah.
Did you have a lot of experience doing like basement and house gigs and stuff like that?
Oh yeah. Well, there was a place in Atlanta. I can't tell you the name of it because it's so bad, but it was in a basement, and it was a pretty musty, dirty basement.
Right.
But we would have some great shows in there.
Yeah.
We play a lot of Cincinnati shows that were in basements, and those are always great shows.
There's something really fun about that, and there's also something about doing that in your youth. I mean, I've been talking about this a little on the show recently, is this the power of ignorance of youth. Like, we're willing to do things and put up with things and sleep on sofas and, light our fans.
We've done our fair share of that.
Fire and stuff like that. And, you get these great experiences like that. And when you get older, you might be like, I don't want to be in a musty basement for the show. But there's a part of me sometimes that misses that too. Wishes I could be that bold or ignore it,
Yeah, see, it's funny because now when we would go on like a long weekend or something like that, and, we would carry air mattresses, and I would always have a sleeping bag and a pillow with me.
They didn't even invent
I want to be comfortable.
air mattresses when I was at that age.
I know. Well, and when I was in Daikaiju, we did a European tour in 2002, I think. And one of the places we stayed in was a squat. And it was...
Wow.
It was pretty underground, but I will say this, they were well organized. Everything they did was well organized. So, I mean,
the band.
No, I mean, the squad
squatters.
itself was actually pretty organized. They kept everything kind of in an operational, state. So
sort of like a commune environment or something.
Yes.
And so they would host a show there and have a band play and all
No,
that
would just be the place we'd stay. But yeah, they usually were at the show.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It goes.
We love talking about that, like back in the day when you go play a show and then you find out like, where's the after party? And then you go there and that's where you're partying till late and that's where you're sleeping, Everybody's just crashing.
Had to do that, yeah.
And then I tried to join a band that was actually on a label, and it's like, we had a van and we had pre-planned everything, and we had a green room with food and hotels and everything you would want, and it was boring.
Yeah,
just wasn't fun.
Well, the funny thing is you could be underground, but over in Europe they treat you that way. It's like you get all of those things. You're fed every show. People are carrying your equipment, and you could be nobody, but they don't care. They support music like they really, really love it. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing the difference. And yes, you're right. It is a little boring. And I kind of wonder like how major bands really deal with that kind of thing, because they deal with all that
downtime. You get up to a certain level where you're just like,
but you can't get out and interact with the audience, which was one thing that I kind of thought if Daikaiju ever made it to a status where we're really well known, you could still mingle with an audience and they would never know who you were because we all wore kabuki masks on stage. So it was that to me was like gore. It's like nobody knows who those guys are, so they could go out and interact with the audience at their own show and nobody would know,
That's wild. Yeah. It's like a drinking song. We all wore kabuki masks.
Yeah.
All right. So before we finish up, there's a totally different topic I thought I'd bring up really quickly. Because it's part of what started a discussion for us a while ago. We'd been hanging out at engineering events here and lunch and stuff like that, and running into each other. And I learned that you also, I mean, Rockstars, as you can tell, Brian's pretty expert in some stuff. And another one that he's pretty expert in is networking and computer networking and cables and Ethernet and all that kind of world. And so you came over and helped me sort out the internet situation in the studio, and we got that rocking. And then you also pointed out like, hey, you can run a fiber optic down to the studio and stuff like that. And that's all fascinating. So not to go too far off into down a rabbit trail, but what are some things that you have found that people, with studios doing their own home studio things, what are some areas of networking, Ethernet, fiber optic cable you found that we just aren't quite aware of that maybe it would be fun to tell us a little bit about? Are we not taking advantage of some pretty awesome tech because we're not using that stuff? Is that a fair question?
Possibly so, because like, for instance, the bandwidth that I have at the house or at the studio is, it's an AT&T 1 gig fiber, but it's synchronous, meaning I get the same bandwidth going up as I do down.
Right.
Where a lot of companies like Xfinity or Spectrum or these coax
the cable
companies,
ones,
the cable companies, they are asynchronous in the fact that they have more bandwidth that you can download, but when you're uploading something, it's slower.
It's slower, right? Yeah.
And think about it from a session. If you've got a large session and you need to upload that so a client can download it, you may sit there for a while uploading it. But if you've got synchronous bandwidth where the upload speed is as fast as the download speed and it's gigabit, you can get a whole session up in the cloud quick.
Yeah, mine is AT&T fiber now. And so let's clarify that a little bit for the rock stars listening. The coax or cable network uses it's that fat cable that's like a little, wire in the middle and a big fat insulation and then some
copper shielding on the outside. Copper shielding,
and it's like the old school cable that would run to your TV.
Yeah.
That's kind of, it seems to be fading out, to be honest. I don't know.
It's fading out, but oddly, I still use mine at the house because I will use what's called a little transceiver. It goes from Ethernet to coax. And since we've done the cut the cable thing, use Roku's and use internet access. So I use the coax cable that's still in the house to run from my router, my IP router that's in one room, all the way across the house into the studio to that room. And I think my bandwidth is 900 megabits per second across that coax cable.
I have no idea what that means. Is that a good thing or not?
That's a good thing. I mean, it's almost gigabit speeds, right?
Okay, so let me pause right there and say that back to you. So what you're saying is, in that situation, if we source our internet from the cable company over coax cable, then we get this asynchronous speed. We get potentially a fast download as long as everybody else isn't watching TV in the neighborhood at the same time, but we get a slow upload over that coax to and from the internet company, the cable company.
Mm-hmm.
But once you've got a high speed coming into your house, you're saying the actual physical cable itself that's already running through your house is perfectly fine and perfectly fast if you convert it down to the coax from the fiber or the Ethernet and then make its way over to your studio and then reconvert it back to Ethernet or something like that. Is that accurate?
It is, because the asynchronous part of it is just by design of what they call the termination equipment, where you've got the coax terminates into your house, okay? But then into your, whatever modem they give you, the hardware that they give you. But on the other end, what they call the CO, the central office, or another way of saying that is point of presence or a POP. That's their equipment that exists out at the end of the street.
POP 3, when you see that POP 3 email and all
point of presence 3, yeah. I don't know if that's exactly what it means, but it's but that is one protocol I've had to deal with a few times. Yeah. But the equipment that they aggregate all of the cable users into, that equipment is generally set up so that it only allows a certain amount of bandwidth in one direction, but not the other. So it's really the one that's doing the asynchronous bandwidth, but the cable itself is just dumb copper. Right.
So the cable can handle it, no problem. It's the format that they actually control the flow of information.
Well, they have to, the hardware that they use, it has to schedule the band, or not really schedule it. It has to allocate the bandwidth for download speeds. Okay, so let's say you've got the equipment that can push a lot of data through it in either direction. But if you can utilize the processing power of that equipment for more download speeds, then you can get more people more downloads by sacrificing some of the allocated resources in that equipment for upload speeds. So that way you can basically give people more speed with the same equipment than to give them less speed, because now you've got also upload speed. You're really just hijacking the hardware and giving them more speed in one direction while sacrificing it in the other.
Okay, so in the interest of focusing on the good stuff rather than the bad stuff, since we can sort of put away the old cable company version of it and just say, Rockstars, be done with the cable company version. You had also pointed out here, so like, for example, in my place, and maybe in some of our listeners, they might have like a home and then a studio separate, or maybe there's a secondary building where the studio is. So I learned from you that I can bring in the fiber network into my home, and then I can recreate a fiber network that buries through the yard and runs over to the studio to make sure that I'm getting very high speed down at the studio. And would that be preferable to burying like a Cat5 cable or a Cat6 cable running from the house down to the studio?
Absolutely. I think it was back in the 70s, AT&T deployed a lot of glass fiber throughout the United States.
They forgot to deploy it to my studio, though.
They did. Yeah, those jerks. But that fiber is still in use today, largely. And they may have replaced some of it, but that old glass fiber is really high quality fiber, right?
So the fiber itself, it's like the coax cable. It's just copper. It can handle a signal. This fiber is
right.
Like
but if it's just glass, if it's a physical medium, copper is this way too. But light going through fiber, it doesn't necessarily deteriorate. And I don't mean by distance, but I mean like the quality of that glass may not deteriorate over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Cat5, Cat6 cable, which is what we use for copper, that cable, one, it can oxidize, but two,
and that affects its ability to conduct the electricity that's needed to go across the cable.
Absolutely. But also as you increase speed over that, eventually the distances that cable can support is shorter and shorter with higher frequencies.
Right.
So if you look on the side of the cable, it has a little megahertz rating on it. And that means that is the absolute highest frequency that you can pass through that cable reliably.
And we're talking about a Ethernet Cat5 or Cat6
cable or whatever.
Now, so again, we don't have to go too deep in the weeds, but a lot of times we're like, which is the cable do I want? And there's a connector. It's a J45, is that right?
RJ45, yeah.
RJ45. And that same connector will go into the back of whatever our gear is and will work on either Cat5 or Cat6 cable.
Yeah.
But Cat6 cable is generally better.
Yeah, it's better.
It's more robust, or it can handle a higher speed.
And handle higher speeds. Yeah. So if you think about that, and as the speeds increase, the flexible glass is not really glass when you deploy fiber in your yard, but it would be kind of like a plastic fiber. It would be like plexiglass. When you deploy that may last for 50, 60 years and still be of good quality. But as speeds increase, you just change out the terminating ends of that fiber, the little, what they call the SFPs, the little thing that the laser is generated from that goes through that fiber. You can increase speeds.
You're talking about like Rockstars when you hook up your ADAC cable and you're like, which end is the on? And you point it and you're like,
you point it in your eye,
yeah.
Well, now it's gotten to bandwidths that you can't even really see it. Even if you cup your hand over it, it's not good to look at a laser, but you can't even see it anymore. It's an ultraviolet.
It's so efficient about sending.
Well, it's just such a high frequency, you don't even see it. But that fiber is basically future-proofed, much better than copper is going to be, because that copper has certain twists throughout the cable. And those little twists, there's like the cables, the individual wires inside the cable are paired up. And those pairs are twisted every so many feet.
Right. And that is to help reject RF frequencies that are bleeding from the outside air onto the cable.
Yep. Much like a star quad XLR cable.
Which doesn't happen in a fiber cable. You don't care about frequencies
RF
in the air. Yeah.
Yep. So what you can also do, and this is kind of a cool thing and kind of useless information, but the way light will travel through that cable is it bounces off the edges of that glass or off the edges of that fiber. And you can inject light into that fiber at different angles. And by doing that, you can multiplex multiple signals through that same piece of fiber.
Holy crap. So you're talking about sending light down the center of the cable, or doing an angle where it's bouncing off one side and then bouncing to the other side,
just keeps
bouncing
bouncing
again,
back and forth.
Just wiggles its way all the way through the cable.
Yeah.
And you can do that a whole bunch of different times at once.
You can do that a whole different time. You can do that in different angles, different ways, and you can also change the frequency, the color of the light. That also changes what you can do. So there are technologies today that exist. I think DWDM might be one of them, where they can push so much bandwidth through that fiber because they're using different colors, different angles, and
that's
so
insane.
That's
dude.
the whole thing.
Can you imagine if you could play your bass that well?
Yeah. God, who was it? There was a bass player back in the 80s or 90s, I think, that advertised.
Actually, it was what's his name? And from Yes was multiplexing his bass to the different amps, right?
Yeah, well, there's that. But there was a guy that advertised, I think one of his bass player magazine advertisements was 31 notes in a second. And I thought, that's an accomplishment. I can do that.
Almost as fast as a 50 hertz sidechain filter for your kick drum dynamic EQ.
Yep. So that's
that's cool, man. That's very, very awesome. Thank you for giving an introduction to that. Yeah. Rockstars, I would encourage you, if you're watching this, listen to this, drop a comment in, let us know if you got any questions about any of that stuff, or just let us know if you want us to do more of a deep dive into any of these things, how to wire up your studio for future-proofed internet.
Yeah,
and things
or
like
even
that.
talking about like Dante or AV.
Yeah, right, because of course that enters the whole world of audio
Yeah.
networking too, but that seems like a whole episode worth of a topic.
We should do that sometime, do a deep dive into some of those things.
I would love to, because I never really learned all this stuff, specifically. I feel like part of it is you sort of dive into that world and now you buy the gear that can use it. But until you do, you don't really understand how it works. You just know that it exists,
Yeah.
So it'd be cool to do an episode with you on that. Let me go to a closing question with you, though, which is one I love to ask all our guests, and you've dealt with it before, which is we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine.
The TARDIS.
Take the TARDIS back in time, and you go find young Brian, who's looking for his plug-in pump on tour for the air mattress and going, shit, man, I forgot to bring the air mattress pump, And you say, listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
I would like to have gone, back when we had LPs and, you look in the liner notes and you see who mixed it, who recorded it, where it was recorded and all that stuff. I kick myself today because I didn't realize it probably could not have been the most difficult thing to try and visit an actual recording studio and learn about this stuff, because back in the early 80s or back in the early mid 80s, when I started messing around with cassette tapes, I'd even do the splicing of a cassette tape to try to extend songs, because they always have these 12-inch mixes of whatever songs, and there would be certain songs I'd be like, oh, I wish they would extend that part or repeat it or something like that. And I would actually go and cut the tape.
Good Lord. Wow. That's dedication.
And splice it
Where
together.
Do you
and
even
do
find a splicing block for cassette tape?
It's just called a pair of scissors. And use the little leader tape.
I love it.
That stuff. So I learned how to do that, and then use a dual cassette to record it.
First overdubs. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would learn how to do that. And I had no idea how close that was to real recording studio work. And I probably could have, at the age of 10, or maybe not 10, but probably at the age of 12 to 15, I possibly could have actually been helping out at a studio and learning this stuff. Yeah. And I wish I'd have done that.
So a great takeaway from that is this concept that, we might be figuring out some pretty cool stuff in our home studios and not realize how close we are to doing something on a pro level, but by finding a way to get out of our little tiny submarine and go out into the world, like go find other people that are teaching this stuff, or other people that are making records, or come to a place like Nashville for a visit and, go visit people, or just listen to lots of recording studio rock stars. Yeah. That we might discover that we're a lot closer than we realized at doing, making some of the right moves.
Yep. And just going, and honestly too, engineers a lot of times are very, very open to discussing these things.
Good Lord, are you kidding? Look, we just spent 2 hours talking about this. We talk about this stuff all the time for a reason. It's what we love to talk about.
I know. I'm totally geeking out.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. Well, Thank you so much for joining us on the show again.
Absolutely.
Let the rock stars know where can they go get in touch with you if they're curious about any of the stuff we talked about, or if they're ready to master their record and make it sound totally awesome. Where should they go find you?
Yeah, soundporter.com. That's the easiest thing. I've learned from, I don't remember who it was, that basically said you need a website, and that should be your main focus, is that website. You need that front page. So soundporter.com is the easiest way to find me, because, social media can always change, but the web is always going to be looking for web pages. So that's a good way to contact me, or Brian at soundporter.com.
The web is always going to be looking for web pages.
That's right.
Love it. And then you also have, there's some free stuff that's worth going over to get too, right? And
yes.
People aren't looking to master yet.
Yeah, there's a free ebook. So just sending, you can just send an email through my contact form, and it's a low friction contact form. So it's just like name, what you're here for, go. It makes it quick, and I get the email, but you'll automatically receive a free copy of my, I think it's over 100 pages now. It's an ebook that talks about mastering, talking about choosing a mastering engineer,
oh, cool,
how to get ready for it. It even has some good mix tips, things to just kind of be prepared for, and understanding if there's more about the mastering process you want to know about. It's basically, it's all in there, and mostly my process, but it's there, it's listed.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's like, there's your chance for, if you got some curiosity about this, if there's your chance to just go visit a pro mastering studio and find out some stuff, and you might discover that, like, oh, I can do that. I can make that move.
Yeah. And it's pretty ad nauseum. I mean, there's so much information in there, and what you don't find in the book, or you don't understand, you could easily Google and find any number of YouTube videos to talk about those things. And at some point I'll be filming some of that stuff.
Cool. Well, dude, thanks for hanging with us again in the studio. I look forward to doing the fiber down to my studio. It's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah.
We'll have to think of a great test of the high speed once, I don't know what we'll stream a 100K video. 100K is not much. 100,000K video. That's what we'll do.
Yeah. Oh,
and Rockstars, thank you for watching. Please remember to, if you enjoyed this interview and enjoyed watching this on the channel, please drop a comment in, say hello, give us a shout out, ask any questions, hit the like, smash the like button. Will you say smash the like button?
Smash the like button. Just kick it.
Kick the like button.
Kick that like button.
Kick that like button and hit the subscribe and notification bell and whatever else new thing they've invented over there on YouTube or the future video apps, so you can get more of this cool stuff from us.
Yes.
We'll see you in the next episode. Dude, I'll see you.
Thanks. See you.
I'll see you in 5 seconds at the coffee machine, if I can figure out how to turn this thing off. There we go. Ciao.
Ciao.
I missed the button. Ciao. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Isotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes. At isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes. These are all things that I highly recommend for your studio because they're going to help you make your best record ever. Also, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is new for us here, and it's a great way for you to help support this show, so I greatly appreciate it. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and for listening. My name is Lid Shaw, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.